I'm still not entirely sure how to start this story because I never imagined I'd be sharing it with anyone. I'm a straightforward person by nature. I try to do the right thing, expecting others will do the same. Most of the time, that works out. But once in a while, you run into someone who flips your world upside down. That's exactly what happened when I was with Jenna. Before I met her, I'd been single for a while, focusing on my career at a software company. I had my own small place, a stable income, and a decent social life. I wasn't desperate for anything serious, but I was open to it if the right person came along. When I first saw Jenna, she was bartending at a local place I visited with friends. She had this warm smile and she slipped me her number along with my receipt. That boldness caught me off guard. We started texting, met for coffee, and things escalated quickly. We clicked over a mutual interest in music, and she seemed appreciative of my honesty. She claimed she was tired of games, and I believed her. We dated for 8 months, then moved in together. I'd never lived with a girlfriend before, but she insisted it would save money and bring us closer. The first few months were great. She was affectionate, curious about my work, and we had a good routine at home. Then she took a new job at a marketing firm, assisting a department head named Travis. I heard a lot about Travis, how he was smart, driven, and had big plans for her. I tried not to be jealous, but she started dressing differently and spending more time at the office. She'd come home late, looking distant. When I confronted her, she insisted everything was fine, that he was just a mentor. But my gut told me something was off. One night, she left her phone charging while she showered. A text popped up from Travis that read something about seeing her in that red dress again. I confronted her, and she admitted they'd been seeing each other for 2 months. She said she was drawn to his ambition. I felt like an idiot. She tried to apologize, but I told her to pack her things and leave. A few days later, she moved in with him. For a while, I felt utterly broken, but I refused to let it destroy me. I focused on my job, spent more time with friends, and slowly rebuilt my confidence. 2 years passed without any contact from her. I wasn't eager to date again, but I was getting back on my feet. I won't pretend the recovery was easy. During those first few months, I'd wake up in the night thinking I heard her voice or saw her shadow in the hallway. I'd replay our argument in my head, wondering if I could have handled it better. Friends would invite me out to distract me, and I'd smile, but inside, I was hollow. I tried to numb myself with work, picking up extra projects and volunteering for late shifts. Anything to keep my mind off what she did. Slowly, I learned to face the pain instead of running from it. I also leaned on my family. My parents lived a couple of hours away, and they'd always told me to visit any time. After the breakup, I drove over more often. My mom would cook huge meals thinking that feeding me was the solution to heartbreak. My dad offered quiet support. He'd take me fishing or just sit with me in the backyard, letting me talk when I was ready. I realized how lucky I was to have that safety net. A lot of people don't get that. The more I allowed myself to be vulnerable, the more I regained my strength. I tried dating casually during that period, but I couldn't shake the distrust. If a woman I met even hinted at secrecy, I'd back away. I wasn't proud of how suspicious I'd become, but I couldn't help it. Cheating leaves a mark, and I had to wrestle with the realization that not everyone is like Jenna. Some people truly value honesty. Therapy helped me see that I was lumping everyone into the same category. My therapist pushed me to be open about my fears, to communicate them instead of letting them fester. It was the only way to move forward. I still recall one moment, about 6 months after the breakup, when I got a text from an unknown number. It was a spam message, but my heart raced, thinking maybe Jenna was trying to contact me. That was the day I realized I had to let go of the hope that she'd apologize and beg me to forgive her. Even if she did, I wouldn't have believed her. You can't trust someone who tramples on your trust once they've found a better option. That was the turning point. I accepted that she was gone for good. I felt free. By the time the first year was over, I'd transformed in ways I never thought possible. I discovered new hobbies, tried rock climbing, and reconnected with old college friends. I realized that part of what made Jenna's betrayal so devastating was that my life had revolved around her. I'd lost myself investing too heavily in the idea of our future. Regaining my independence gave me a confidence boost. I took a chance on a small side business, designing apps for local clients. Although it was modest income, it taught me I could stand on my own, both emotionally and financially. Strangely enough, people who knew us both would sometimes drop hints that she wasn't as happy as she pretended to be. I'd see pictures of her and Travis online, all smiles, but I'd hear rumors that he was controlling, prone to jealousy. I never felt sorry for her at the time, just angry that she'd chosen him over me. Still, a small part of me wondered if she missed what we had. I pushed those thoughts aside, reminding myself that she was the one who betrayed me. If she was unhappy, that was her own making, not my concern anymore. I remember telling a friend that the worst part wasn't losing her, it was losing the faith I once had in love. It took many nights of self-reflection to understand that her betrayal didn't have to define my future. I could choose to remain bitter, or I could use it as a lesson. I'm not saying I became some enlightened sage overnight, but I did realize that life goes on, even when you think you've hit rock bottom. That's why, by the time she showed up asking for help, I was strong enough to handle it without falling apart. Then, one Saturday, she showed up at my apartment building. She looked frail, with dark circles under her eyes. She said she needed to talk. I hesitated, but I let her in. She told me how Travis ended up dumping her for someone else. On top of that, he fired her, leaving her unemployed. She was living in her car and had nowhere else to go. She begged me for financial help, claiming she finally realized her mistake. I stared at her, stunned by the audacity of her request. Part of me felt pity for how low she'd fallen. Another part of me remembered those lies she told and how she tore my heart apart. She swore she'd pay me back, that she'd learned her lesson. But I just looked at her and said, "You cheated on me and left. Why on earth would I help you?" She broke down sobbing, saying she had nobody else to turn to. I could see how desperate she was. I felt that old urge to be kind, but I also remembered my promise not to let anyone walk over me again. So I offered a potential deal. I said I needed time to think. Over the following days, she bombarded me with texts, asking if I'd made a decision. I stayed non-committal, but I was laying plans. I wanted to make her regret coming to me for a handout, and I wanted a measure of revenge. A mutual acquaintance confirmed her story about getting fired and blacklisted by Travis, so at least she wasn't lying about that. She really was broke and homeless, crashing in her car at night. I decided on a plan. I told her I'd give her enough money to cover a couple of months' rent under specific conditions. I demanded she sign an IOU, provide references, and post a public apology on social media about how she betrayed me. She looked horrified, but desperation won out. She agreed. That night, she posted a paragraph on her profile, admitting she cheated on me, saying how she'd made a terrible mistake that cost her everything. It wasn't long, but it was humiliating enough for her. I took screenshots, then told her to meet me at my lawyer's office the next day. She showed up, and we signed the paperwork. I handed her a check. She clutched it like it was her lifeline, tears in her eyes. I felt a twisted satisfaction, but I kept my face neutral. She left, probably relieved she'd found a soft spot in me. She had no idea I'd written strict clauses into the contract, immediate default if she missed a single payment, with full legal authority to garnish her wages. At first, it seemed like she'd found a temporary apartment in a rough part of town. I heard she was applying for jobs, but her reputation had taken a hit. She missed her first payment deadline, so I filed a notice of default. She begged me for more time, but I said no. She scrambled and finally paid, but she was late again on the second payment. That's when I took her to court. My lawyer secured a judgment that allowed me to garnish any wages she might earn in the future. She accused me of ruining her life, but I felt no remorse. News spread among our old acquaintances. Some thought I was cruel, but most understood I was simply holding her accountable. She tried to move out of state to escape the judgment, but we tracked her down. The garnishment was valid wherever she went. She was running out of options. Last I heard, she was sleeping on a relative's couch, still unemployed. She blocked me on social media, probably out of spite. By then, I'd moved on emotionally. I was dating someone new, an honest, compassionate woman who treated me with respect. I told her what happened, and she supported me, though she warned me not to let bitterness consume me. I took her advice seriously. The legal proceedings were mechanical. The satisfaction I felt was more about knowing I'd refused to be a doormat a second time. People ask if I regret not forgiving Jenna. My answer is no. She betrayed me, and I had no obligation to come to her rescue. Offering her money under strict conditions was my way of protecting myself while letting her dig her own hole if she couldn't keep her promises. And that's exactly what happened. I don't lose sleep over it. I view it as a life lesson. Betrayal has consequences, and sometimes those consequences are delivered by the person you betrayed. I won't pretend it was the most gracious move, but it was honest. She demanded mercy, and I gave her a deal that was purely transactional. If she'd truly changed, she would have worked hard to meet the terms of the contract. Instead, she defaulted almost immediately. If she ever manages to repay me, I'll honor the agreement and leave her alone. But if not, I have every right to enforce the judgment whenever she tries to get on her feet. I might even let it go eventually, but that time hasn't come. For now, I've got closure. She can't claim I refused to help. I just helped on terms that guaranteed I wouldn't be left empty-handed again. These days, I don't think about her much. Sometimes I'll get a message from an old friend asking about the situation, and I'll just say it's settled. But if Jenna tries to reach out again, I won't even respond unless she's prepared to address her debt. There's no drama left, just a legal matter. And that's the way I like it. I know some people believe in forgiveness, but I believe in self-respect. She made a choice to cheat on me and walk away. Then she made another choice to come back when she was broke and had nobody else. I didn't turn her away, I just refused to let her exploit me again. If that makes me the bad guy in her eyes, so be it. My conscience is clear. People have asked if I feel any satisfaction knowing she got played by Travis and then dumped. I won't lie. I did feel a twinge of grim vindication. She left me for someone she believed was higher status, only to get tossed aside. That's a harsh reality check. But I didn't set out to push her further down. I simply held her to a standard of accountability she'd never experienced before. In some ways, I'm grateful. Because of this ordeal, I learned how to stand up for myself and not give in to manipulative tactics. I also learned that betrayal is a line I won't cross and won't tolerate. If someone betrays me, there are lasting consequences. It's not about revenge for revenge's sake. It's about not letting people think they can walk all over you without repercussions. I heard through the grapevine that she blames me for why she can't find decent employment. She accuses me of spreading rumors that make her look unhireable. In truth, I haven't gone out of my way to tarnish her name. I simply told the truth when asked. If recruiters see her public apology or learn about her questionable work history under Travis, that's on her. Actions have consequences. I don't know if she's still in town or if she's tried to slip away quietly. I haven't checked her social media since the day she blocked me. If I ever see her again, I doubt we'll have much to say. We might just walk right past each other, like strangers. I'm fine with that. Her chapter in my life is over. Since all this happened, I've been more cautious in relationships. I take things slowly, watching for red flags. My new girlfriend understands my history, and she's proven herself trustworthy time and time again. We have our share of disagreements, but nothing that shakes my faith in her character. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever fully trust someone again, but so far, I'm doing okay. When I look back, I realize I dodged a bullet. If Jenna hadn't cheated, we might have gotten married, and I'd have been tied to her long term. The breakup was painful, but it exposed her true nature before we made any irreversible commitments. Now, I'm free to be with someone who deserves my loyalty and affection. I don't harbor any illusions that I'm perfect. I had my flaws, probably worked too much, and might not have given her all the excitement she craved, but that never justified cheating. She had choices. She could have broken up with me honestly. Instead, she opted for sneaking around with her boss. That's on her, not me. If there's one takeaway I want people to get from this, it's that you don't owe unconditional forgiveness to someone who deliberately betrayed you. You can choose to walk away entirely, or you can make them face the consequences, but you don't have to give them a free pass. Sometimes the best you can do is stand firm and let them see what it feels like to be on the receiving end of their own choices. It might seem heartless to some, but I've found my peace. I'm not losing sleep over the legal steps I took. I'm not pondering ways to ruin her life. She's done a pretty good job of that on her own. All I did was make sure she didn't get a free ride from me. So that's my story. It isn't dramatic in a Hollywood sense, but it's real. My ex cheated on me with her boss, left me for him, got dumped herself, and came crawling back. I let her have a taste of my mercy, but strictly on my terms. She defaulted almost immediately, proving she hadn't changed at all. Now, I've moved on, and she's left with a debt she can't escape. I'm not interested in hearing her excuses anymore. I've spent enough energy on this already. My life is better now, filled with people who genuinely respect me. If Jenna had stuck around, maybe we could have built something great together. But she threw it away for a temporary thrill. That was her choice. And when she came back, I made mine. I'm content with how things turned out. I doubt she'll ever repay the full amount, but that was never really the point. The point was to establish boundaries and remind her that betrayal has a price. If she tries to rebuild her life, good for her, but she won't be rebuilding it with my unearned support. I gave her a lifeline and she sabotaged it. So when people ask if I forgive her, I say, no. Sometimes forgiveness isn't an option, especially when the betrayal was deliberate. She took my trust and spat on it. I won't pretend to be some saint. I'm just a guy who learned to protect himself and make sure no one ever uses him again. That's enough for me. I used to think that money was a purely transactional thing, something you earned, spent, and hopefully saved. I never imagined it could become the wedge that separated me from my own family. My mother remarried when I was 20, just a year after my father passed away. Her new husband, Roger, seemed cordial enough at first. He had a warm laugh and a polite manner, always offering to help around the house and praising my mother's cooking. He even asked me about my part-time job at the local tech store, acting like he cared about my future and my interests. But as the months went by, the glossy veneer wore thin, and I started seeing the real him. He had an older son, Jacob, who was only a year younger than me. I tried to welcome my stepbrother into my life, but I quickly realized he was lazy and entitled. He hopped between community colleges, never completed a class, and complained that professors were too strict or that textbooks were too expensive. He had no job, no ambitions, and seemingly no concerns about mooching off his father or anyone else who offered. I was 19 when my father passed, and that loss forced me to grow up quickly. I started saving every dollar I could. Even as I worked part-time, I lived modestly, hoarding my savings in a high-yield account. My goal was to move out eventually, maybe buy a used car. Having something stashed away made me feel secure, like I still had some control over my life. My mother had been living off the small inheritance my father left, mostly to cover house bills and groceries. I never asked for a cent of it because I knew it was all she had until she could find a better-paying job. She worked at a flower shop, part-time, and the pay was barely enough to keep up with the mortgage. When Roger moved in, I hoped he would at least share in some of the financial burden. He claimed he had a steady job as a consultant for a marketing firm, but I rarely saw him leave the house at a consistent hour. Most days, he lounged in front of the TV, watched sports, and occasionally tinkered with some freelance gig on his laptop. He boasted about how good he was at talking clients into big deals, but I never saw any real evidence of it. Meanwhile, Jacob spent his days streaming video games, complaining about his life, and demanding that someone pay for his tuition when he enrolled in yet another new program. I tried to stay out of their business. My focus was on my own job and my own savings. I avoided fights, mostly because I didn't want to upset my mother. I knew she was still fragile after losing my dad, and if Roger gave her some companionship, I felt I had no right to disrupt that. But the first sign of trouble came when I noticed small discrepancies in my bank statements. It was subtle at first, just a few transfers here and there that I didn't remember making. At first, I told myself it had to be a banking error. I even went to the branch in person to ask if there was a mistake, but they confirmed the transfers were made online. I lived in denial a bit longer, hoping it was just an accounting slip on my part. But one evening, after I got home from work, I stepped into Roger's makeshift office in the corner of the living room and saw that he had my laptop open. He jumped when he saw me, slammed it shut, and stammered some excuse about checking the Wi-Fi settings. I felt a chill in my stomach. That night, I reset all my passwords and enabled every security measure I could find. I even called the bank to request a new card and told them to block any external transfers unless I personally verified them. Still, I had no proof Roger was behind anything, just a nagging suspicion that wouldn't go away. The next time I caught him snooping was in my bedroom. He said he was looking for a screwdriver, but my desk drawers were open, and I knew he had no business in there. That was when I realized I needed to be proactive. I installed a small camera in my room, aimed at my desk, purely for my peace of mind. Within days, I had footage of him rifling through my things. By then, I suspected he'd been stealing from me, but I still didn't have the nerve to confront him. When I finally did gather the courage to confront him, it wasn't because of the camera footage alone. It was because my bank account suddenly took a major hit. Someone had withdrawn nearly $5,000. That was a huge chunk of my savings, money I'd been setting aside for a down payment on a small condo I'd been eyeing. I remember the day I discovered it, my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. I immediately called the bank, demanded an investigation, and requested all possible details about the transaction. They told me it was transferred to an account under Roger's name. That was it. I had all the proof I needed. I confronted him in the kitchen, tears burning in my eyes, fury vibrating through me. My mother was washing dishes at the sink, and she dropped everything to see what the commotion was. He denied it at first, said I was confused, maybe it was a computer glitch. When I told him the bank had records of his account, he tried another angle, claiming it was a temporary loan he intended to pay back. I looked to my mother, expecting her to explode with the same outrage I felt, but instead, she stepped between us and spoke in a soft, trembling voice. She said Roger was only trying to help Jacob pay for his classes, that her stepson needed a chance at a decent future, and that I was still young enough to earn the money back eventually. I've never felt so betrayed in my entire life. My father's death had shaken me, but this was something else. My own mother, the woman who'd always told me to be self-reliant, was now telling me to just accept the theft of my savings because I was young and capable. I was furious. I demanded that Roger return the money immediately. He shrugged and said he'd already paid the tuition fees and it wasn't refundable. Jacob needed the classes, he insisted, and it was for the greater good of our blended family. My stomach churned as I realized they'd planned this behind my back. My mother must have known from the start. I told them both that if Roger didn't return my money, I would involve the police. That's when my mother started sobbing, telling me not to ruin everything. She begged me to think about the family's harmony. She claimed that if I got the authorities involved, Roger might lose his job and we'd all be in financial ruin. I found myself torn between my desire for justice and my fear of shattering whatever remained of my family. Eventually, I decided to give them a chance to make it right. I asked for a repayment plan, something that would ensure I got my money back without having to drag them into court. Roger agreed, but only half-heartedly. He said he would start paying me back in a few months once Jacob finished his semester and he got more clients. Those months came and went with no payments. Roger would make excuses every time I asked. He said Jacob needed more textbooks, or he was waiting on a big client check. I watched as Jacob continued to lounge around the house, skipping classes and complaining that college was pointless. My mother, meanwhile, looked at me with tired eyes and asked me to be patient. She reminded me that we were a family and needed to support each other. But the longer this dragged on, the more my resentment grew. I felt like an outsider in my own home. I couldn't understand how my mother could just brush off the fact that her husband stole from her child. Even if it was to fund Jacob's education, it didn't make it right. After half a year of empty promises, I decided I'd had enough. I told Roger and my mother that I was done waiting and that I wanted my money back immediately. I threatened to go to the police if he didn't start paying me back within a week. Roger laughed and said I was bluffing. He stood there in the living room, arms crossed, smirking at me like he owned the place. Jacob chimed in that I was being selfish, that I didn't care about his future. My mother just looked away, unable to meet my gaze. That hurt more than anything. I realized then that if I wanted justice, I'd have to take matters into my own hands, even if it meant burning bridges forever. The next day, I took a personal day off work and marched into the local police station. I wasn't sure what I'd say, but I knew I had to do something. I spoke with an officer, explained the situation, and showed him the bank records. He said it was a civil matter, but if I wanted to press charges for theft, I could try. He warned me it might create a permanent rift. I told him that rift was already there. I filed a report, but I knew that was just the beginning. The officer said they would investigate, contact Roger, and possibly bring him in for questioning. I walked out of the station feeling both terrified and strangely relieved. I had finally taken a step toward reclaiming my dignity. When I got home, I found Roger in my room again, rummaging through my drawers. I snapped. I screamed at him to get out, and I told him I'd gone to the police. His face went pale. He tried to intimidate me, stepping closer, towering over me, but I didn't back down. My mother came rushing in, and I told her point blank that I was pressing charges. She looked horrified, not at Roger, but at me. She started to cry, accusing me of tearing the family apart. I told her that Roger had done that the moment he stole from me. She pleaded with me to reconsider, but I'd reached my breaking point. Roger disappeared for a few days after that. I learned from a neighbor that the police had come by, asking questions. My mother was inconsolable, pacing the house and fretting about how this was all going to look. She was more worried about appearances than the betrayal itself. I tried to explain that I was pushed into this, that Roger had stolen from me and refused to pay me back. She said I was being vindictive, that I should have just let it go for the sake of peace. That's when I realized she'd chosen her side from the start, and it wasn't mine. A week later, I received a call from the investigating officer. He said Roger had agreed to a mediation process, willing to sign an agreement to repay me in monthly installments as long as I dropped the charges. I considered it. I didn't want to see Roger in jail necessarily, I just wanted my money back. I met with the officer, Roger, and a mediator. Roger tried to play the victim, claiming financial hardships and blaming me for putting undue pressure on him. I refused to budge. The mediator eventually got Roger to sign an agreement to repay the stolen amount within 1 year, with the first payment due immediately. If he missed any payment, I could reinstate the charges. I felt a small victory as I walked out, but a bigger part of me knew I could never trust my mother or Roger again. For a short time, Roger actually started making payments. They were small, but consistent, and I began to see a glimmer of hope that I might recover most of my money. However, as the months passed, the payments became more sporadic. Roger claimed he had health issues, then said he lost a client, then insisted Jacob needed more financial support. Each time, he fell further behind. I warned him repeatedly that if he didn't keep up, I'd call the mediator and reinstate the charges. He'd act contrite for a week or two, then fall back into his old patterns. Meanwhile, my mother's relationship with me deteriorated. She accused me of being heartless, of wanting to see Roger suffer. She said I was tearing the family apart over something that could be replaced. She refused to see that it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about respect, about betrayal, about boundaries that had been completely disregarded. Every day, I felt the tension in the house. Jacob would shoot me dirty looks and grumble under his breath whenever I entered the room. Roger avoided me altogether, and my mother barely spoke to me except to criticize or demand that I be more compassionate. It became unbearable. After another missed payment, I decided I was done waiting. I contacted the mediator, informed him of Roger's failure to comply, and requested that the charges be reinstated. This time, I wasn't interested in any more negotiations. I wanted real consequences. As the police began their renewed investigation, Roger panicked. He tried to beg me for more time, offered me partial payments in cash, and even tried to rope Jacob into a guilt-tripping scheme. Jacob came to me one night, claiming he was on the verge of a big breakthrough at school, that he'd repay me once he landed some imaginary high-paying job. I laughed in disbelief. He had barely passed a single course, yet he was lecturing me about patience. I told him this was no longer my problem. If Roger couldn't pay, then he'd have to face the legal consequences. It didn't take long for Roger's shady financial dealings to come to light. The police discovered he had multiple credit cards in default and a series of unpaid loans. He'd been shifting money between accounts for years, living on borrowed funds while pretending to have a stable consulting job. It was only a matter of time before everything caught up with him. When the day came for him to be formally charged, he tried to strike a plea deal, but the evidence was too substantial. My mother sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, face drawn and eyes filled with tears. She still wouldn't look at me. She blamed me for reporting him, for forcing the issue, for not being understanding of his financial woes. I felt no sympathy. Roger had stolen from me and shown no remorse. Jacob had insulted me and contributed nothing but whining. My mother had chosen their side. As far as I was concerned, they could live with the consequences of their actions. Roger was found guilty of fraud and theft, among other charges. He received a probation sentence and was ordered to repay not just me, but also several creditors. He couldn't keep up, and eventually he declared bankruptcy. Jacob dropped out of school once again, claiming the stress was too much. My mother called me, begging for help. She said they were going to lose the house, that they had nowhere else to go, and that I was punishing them for a mistake. But I didn't see it as a mere mistake. It was a deliberate act of betrayal, and neither Roger nor Jacob ever showed genuine remorse. I told my mother that I was done. I had my own life to build, and I refused to sink any more of my resources or emotional energy into their problems. I had already lost a significant chunk of my savings, spent countless hours dealing with legal issues, and endured emotional turmoil for months. I had nothing left to give them. She begged, she cried, and she guilt-tripped me, saying I was abandoning my family. I told her that family doesn't steal from each other and then expect the victim to be okay with it. She said I was being cruel, and I responded that I was merely protecting myself. I moved out of the house shortly after, renting a small apartment closer to my job. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. A few months after I settled into my new place, I heard that Roger and Jacob had packed up and left the house. My mother tried to hold on to it, but with all the debt and her meager income, she finally sold it at a loss. She texted me saying she missed me and wanted to talk. I agreed to meet her at a nearby cafe. She looked older, worn down by stress, and I almost felt sorry for her. But then she tried to convince me to drop what remained of the debt Roger owed to give him a fresh start. I realized she still believed I should sacrifice myself for their benefit. I told her no. I refused to let the past repeat. She stared at me, tears in her eyes, accusing me of being heartless. I responded that I'd simply learned to value my own dignity. We parted on tense terms, and she hasn't contacted me since. I've moved on with my life, found a better job, and started saving again. I refuse to forgive people who don't respect me enough to see me as more than a convenient resource. I always believed my wife, Tessa, was the most caring and responsible person I knew. She devoted herself to our daughter, Haley, from the moment she was born, reading parenting books and hovering over every tiny detail of her life. When Tessa mentioned she wanted a hobby to feel more fulfilled, I felt relieved for her. She deserved a break from the daily routines of cooking, cleaning, and mothering. At first, I supported any idea she had: pottery, painting, volunteering at an animal shelter, anything that might reignite her spark. But she kept changing her mind, never settling on one activity. Then she claimed she found something that made her truly happy, some creative pursuit she refused to name. She started coming home later than usual, always with a new explanation. It was harmless, I told myself. She was probably enjoying an art class or a photography workshop. Slowly, however, Tessa began missing Haley's events, even the ones she used to plan months in advance, like her choir recitals and spelling bees. Each time, Tessa apologized and promised she wouldn't miss the next one, but somehow, life kept getting in the way, and I felt a knot of anxiety forming inside. Tessa's excuses began to feel like flimsy bandages slapped over a growing wound. On Tuesday evenings, she claimed she was attending a knit and crochet circle with a group of neighborhood women. Yet, she never brought home a single scarf or sweater. When Haley had a small dance recital, Tessa texted me 15 minutes before showtime, saying she was stuck in traffic and might miss it. She arrived right at the end, wearing unfamiliar perfume. That scent lingered in our living room, unsettling me more than I wanted to admit. I tried asking about her new hobby, but her answers were always vague or contradictory. Sometimes she mentioned learning a foreign language. Other times, she spoke about volunteering at an art gallery. Oddly, she never showed any evidence. No pamphlets, no new vocabulary, no glimpses of artwork. Haley asked me one night, "Why doesn't Mom come to my stuff anymore?" I had no real answer, a flimsy reassurance that she was busy with something important. I told myself it was a phase, that Tessa would settle down and remember what mattered most: her family. But with every broken promise, I felt my patience fraying, unsure how long I could pretend everything was fine. As more weeks passed, Tessa's odd behavior grew impossible to ignore. She had always been open with her phone, leaving it on the counter for anyone to see, but now she clutched it like a secret diary. I noticed her texting well past midnight, the screen's glow illuminating her tense face. If I asked who it was, she'd say it was just a friend from her new class, someone named Lily. I felt a pang of unease each time I heard that name. At first, I was grateful Tessa had found a female companion. Maybe that connection would fill the gap she seemed to feel. But her late arrivals and missed family dinners only grew more frequent, and Lily's name appeared more often in casual conversation. Whenever I pressed for details, where had they met? What did Lily do for a living? Tessa's answers were frustratingly thin. She'd wave me off or change the subject. I tried to keep my suspicions in check, reminding myself that Tessa had never given me a reason to doubt her before. Yet, the gap between us widened with every unanswered question, and Haley's disappointment became an ever-present ache that I couldn't fix with reassuring words. One evening, Haley was practicing for her upcoming spelling bee. She carefully recited words at the kitchen table, scanning my face for encouragement. Tessa was supposed to be there too, but she texted me again saying, "Lily needs my help, running late." Her absence cast a heavy shadow over our home. Haley pretended not to mind, but her eyes told a different story. I sat by her side, reading the next word on the list, unable to ignore the weight of Tessa's empty chair. Later that night, Tessa slipped in quietly, avoiding eye contact as she tossed her purse on the sofa. I asked if everything was okay. She claimed Lily had personal issues, that she was just offering emotional support. Her explanation should have eased my concern, yet something about her hollow expression alarmed me more. We barely spoke after that. Tessa went straight to bed, and I listened to the soft hum of the air conditioner, wondering when the laughter we once shared had become so strained. Even in our silent bedroom, I felt her drifting away, like a shadow you catch out of the corner of your eye but can never fully see. Despite my reservations, I wanted to trust Tessa. We'd built a life together. Weekend brunches, family game nights, beach vacations. She had always been the rock that held our small world steady. Now that stability teetered under invisible pressure. Worried, I confided in my brother, who advised me to have a straightforward conversation, to lay everything out in the open. That weekend, when Haley was at a friend's house, I prepared to speak with Tessa. My heart pounded as I approached her. She was scrolling through her phone, face drawn. I told her I missed her, that her absences were hurting Haley. She nodded, but said very little. Then she admitted she felt trapped in her routine, that her life had become so predictable she could barely breathe. I asked where Lily fit into all this. Tessa's eyes flickered with guilt, but she insisted Lily was just a friend, someone who understood her need for excitement. I wanted to believe her. I wrapped my arms around her and promised we could find new ways to explore life together. For a moment, Tessa softened in my embrace, but I sensed she was keeping a part of herself locked behind a door I couldn't open. A few days later, I noticed an odd charge on our credit card statement. A luxurious restaurant downtown, the kind of place Tessa and I had never visited. When I questioned her, she said Lily had taken her there as a treat. The story felt forced, but I didn't press. Then came a missing ring from her jewelry box, one Tessa cherished, yet claimed she misplaced. I tried convincing myself these were all coincidences, that Tessa was just careless with her belongings. However, I couldn't quell the knot in my stomach whenever her phone buzzed late at night, or when she came home with a hurried explanation about some new workshop. Haley, for her part, kept drawing pictures of our family with Tessa standing far away, holding hands with a faceless figure. I thought it was childish imagination, but perhaps children sense truths long before adults can admit them. By then, Tessa had missed Haley's last 3 school events. Each time, I watched Haley scan the audience for her mother, only to sigh in disappointment. My wife would arrive afterward, full of apologies that rang hollow, and I found myself biting my tongue to keep from lashing out in front of Haley. One afternoon, I was searching for a folder in Tessa's desk when I discovered a small notebook tucked beneath a pile of bills. Inside were scribbled phone numbers, dates, and times, none of which I recognized. One name stood out on nearly every page, Lily. My heart thundered as I turned the pages, seeing references to hotels and dinners, along with brief notes like, "Meeting Lily, can't wait." Shock curled in my stomach. This wasn't a benign hobby partner. The evidence of intimacy was scrawled in Tessa's own handwriting. I felt dizzy, as if the walls of our house had begun tilting. Every reassurance she had given me seemed like a cruel distortion. I put the notebook back carefully, my mind reeling with questions. Should I confront her? Should I gather more proof? Most importantly, how could she risk our daughter's happiness for whatever this was? I decided I had to face the truth. Tessa was likely having an affair. The realization weighed on me like a lead blanket. I'd never doubted her loyalty until now, and the finality of that broken trust pierced my chest more deeply than I could have imagined. Still, a small voice whispered that I should give Tessa a chance to explain. That evening, when she came home, I calmly mentioned finding the notebook. She froze, eyes wide with panic. Before I could speak again, she blurted out that it wasn't what it looked like. She said Lily needed help organizing events, that Tessa was just keeping track of schedules. Her explanation made little sense. The mention of hotels and the intimate tone of her notes didn't align with any charity function. I pressed her, feeling my pulse hammer in my ears. Tears welled in her eyes, and she claimed she couldn't bear the monotony at home, that she craved excitement and felt Lily offered it. The heartbreak that swept over me was almost tangible. All those nights of Haley waiting, all those broken promises, were they just collateral damage in this search for fulfillment? I reached for Tessa's hand, trembling, asking if she even considered what this was doing to our daughter. She sobbed, but her words came out tangled in guilt. She didn't know how to stop herself. She swore they hadn't gone too far, yet the look in her eyes suggested otherwise. I spent a sleepless night replaying Tessa's words, wrestling with my own fury and despair. Dawn found me in a haze, unsure if I could salvage our marriage or if I even wanted to. That morning, Tessa insisted she would end all contact with Lily. She wanted to prove she could be the mother and wife she once was. She vowed never to lie to me again. In a burst of desperate optimism, I agreed to give her a chance. For a little while, things improved. Tessa tried attending Haley's cheer practice, clapping loudly from the sidelines, though Haley's reactions remained guarded. We made dinner together, something we hadn't done in months, and Tessa attempted to laugh at my silly jokes. I sensed her efforts were genuine, but a sliver of doubt curled in the back of my mind. Late one evening, I caught her staring at her phone with tears in her eyes. When I asked what was wrong, she claimed she was just tired. I pretended to believe her, yet every time a text arrived, I saw her flinch, as if haunted by something she couldn't fully leave behind. Our fragile normalcy hung by a thread. Everything came crashing down the day of Haley's school talent show. Haley had practiced a piano piece for weeks, excited for both of us to hear her. That afternoon, Tessa received a call and slipped into the bedroom. She emerged minutes later with a distant look, claiming she had an emergency at work, though I knew she didn't work weekends. She promised to return in time for Haley's performance. Haley seemed unconvinced, biting her lip as she asked if Mom would show up. My stomach churned, recalling every disappointment Tessa had inflicted. Yet, I tried to muster hope for Haley's sake. We arrived at the school auditorium, took our seats, and waited. The lights dimmed, and Haley's turn approached. Tessa's seat remained empty. Haley blinked back tears, walked onto the stage, and performed beautifully, her small hands trembling on the keys. She bowed to applause that she could barely acknowledge, eyes scanning the crowd for her missing mother. By the time Tessa finally arrived, Haley's face was pale with hurt. Tessa launched into a flurry of excuses, but Haley turned away, devastated. I could barely speak, fury boiling under my skin. Later that night, after Haley had gone to bed, I confronted Tessa. I demanded she tell me the truth right then and there. Her shoulders sagged, and a resigned weariness dulled her features. She admitted she'd been with Lily. It was no longer a casual friendship. She cared for her. Tessa said she felt alive in ways she hadn't felt in years, that Lily understood her fears and desires. My heart felt like it was splitting down the center. Through clenched teeth, I asked if she remembered the little girl upstairs, the one who needed her mother more than anything. Tears choked her voice as she insisted she wanted to repair the damage, but she didn't know how to walk away from Lily. The more she spoke, the more I realized how deep she had gone. I sat there, silent, as she begged for forgiveness and promised again to cut Lily out of her life. Her pleas sounded hollow. For the first time in our marriage, I wondered if it was already too late, if Tessa's version of fulfillment could ever align with the family we had built. A few days later, I made a decision. I left work early and drove straight to the address I'd seen scribbled in Tessa's notebook. It was a small house in a nicer part of town, with a tidy lawn and flower pots lining the porch. My heart pounded as I parked across the street. Sure enough, Tessa's car was there. I watched from a distance, anger and heartbreak colliding in my chest. After an hour, the front door opened and Tessa stepped out, followed by a woman I assumed must be Lily. They were talking in hushed tones, standing close enough to suggest an intimacy that made my blood run cold. Lily touched Tessa's arm, and Tessa leaned in, her face soft with longing. I nearly left the car then, consumed by rage. But something made me freeze. I saw Tessa pull away, tears in her eyes. She turned abruptly and hurried to her car, leaving Lily standing on the porch. Even from where I sat, I could see Lily's despair etched on her face. The scene wasn't one of carefree lovers, it was riddled with heartbreak and desperation on both sides. I followed Tessa home, arriving a few minutes after she did. She was in the living room, slumped on the couch as though her world had collapsed. When she noticed me, her eyes brimmed with dread. Before she could speak, I told her I'd seen them together. I demanded to know if she wanted to be with Lily more than she wanted our family. Tessa began to sob, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Then she admitted Lily had urged her to leave me, that they could start fresh, but Tessa couldn't bear to abandon Haley. Her voice cracked as she confessed she was torn between a love that felt electric and a life she'd built for nearly a decade. I thought I would explode from the pain of it all. Yet, in a rush of anguished clarity, I told Tessa she needed to choose, fully and finally. She knelt on the floor, crying so hard I thought she might never stop, whispering that she wanted to come back home for good. She said she'd call Lily and end everything. Hearing that should have felt like relief, but all I felt was an overwhelming exhaustion. I wish I could say our story ended with a clean break and immediate healing, but reality is messier. Tessa made that call, and for days afterward, she walked around like a ghost, burdened by guilt and leftover feelings she couldn't simply erase. Haley sensed the tension, though she didn't know the specifics. Whenever Tessa hugged her, Haley would cling back, as if fearful her mother would slip away again. I questioned whether Tessa's devotion was genuine or just a reaction to seeing my anger. I kept expecting another late-night text, another cryptic excuse, but it never came. Instead, Tessa began showing up for Haley's recitals with anxious enthusiasm, baking cookies for the bake sale, and letting her phone stay in the kitchen instead of by her side. Though I remained guarded, I saw flickers of the woman I once knew. The real turning point came on the night of Haley's final piano performance. Tessa sat in the front row, tears rolling down her cheeks as Haley played. Afterward, Tessa enveloped our daughter in a fierce hug. For the first time in months, Haley's smile reached her eyes. I still don't know if I'll ever fully trust Tessa again, or if the ghost of Lily will linger in our marriage. But in that moment, I saw a glimpse of genuine remorse in Tessa, and it reminded me why I fell in love with her in the first place. Sometimes the best we can hope for is a second chance, even when the future remains uncertain. I never imagined I'd end up so estranged from my own parents, but here I am, writing on a throwaway account because I can't risk anyone I know finding out the truth. I come from a small suburban family, just me, my older brother, and our parents. My brother, let's call him Nick, was always coddled, even though I was the more responsible kid. While I was studying and saving money, he was out partying with friends, racking up credit card debt, and mooching off our parents. I always assumed that one day my parents would realize their mistake. But I was wrong. That realization hit me like a freight train a couple of years ago, and everything that followed completely destroyed what little trust I had left. We always lived modestly. My parents never flaunted wealth, but they had a nice house, a decent retirement fund, and some savings they'd put aside for us. I grew up under the assumption that we'd share anything they had left over when they passed or decided to pass things on. It was just natural for me to believe they'd split things evenly, given I'd never been a problem child, never missed curfews, always did my chores, and even went to college on scholarships and part-time jobs. I didn't require them to pay my tuition because I had it covered. Nick, on the other hand, needed bailouts. He got kicked out of a community college, got a car repossessed, and lived rent-free at my parents' house until well into his 30s. I guess that should have been the tip-off. They were never going to let him fail, even if it meant throwing me under the bus. Fast forward to when my parents decided to retire. They sat me and Nick down and told us they wanted to talk about their estate planning. I expected they would divide everything fairly, but they announced that they'd be leaving their entire estate to Nick to give him a hand up. They tried to soften the blow by saying I was already successful and didn't need as much, while Nick never quite found his footing and needed more stability. I was stunned. I tried to reason with them to point out how that was unfair, but they dismissed me. The final dagger was when they said I was so independent that I'd manage just fine. Nick shot me this little smirk, and I swear it took everything in me not to stand up and flip the table. I walked out that day feeling gut-punched. I spent a few weeks simmering in resentment, but I tried to move on with my life. My parents and I didn't talk as much after that. Whenever my mom tried to bring it up, she'd say, "You know, we love you just as much." Like that was supposed to make me feel better. Meanwhile, Nick was busy bragging about how he'd use the inheritance to buy a better house or invest in some shady crypto scheme. He actually had the nerve to ask me for advice on investing, as if I was supposed to help him manage money my parents had promised to him. I shut him down and refused to discuss it. That's when he started telling me not to hold a grudge. The hypocrisy was mind-blowing. Then came the real kicker about a year later. I'd been saving diligently, building a decent emergency fund in my personal savings account. I didn't hide my success. I owned a small condo, had a stable job in financial consulting, and was dating a wonderful person, who I'll call Emily. Life wasn't perfect, but at least I had control over my finances and future, or so I thought. One day, I noticed an unauthorized withdrawal from my account. I'd set up alerts for any large transactions, and seeing thousands of dollars suddenly gone nearly gave me a heart attack. After some frantic phone calls with the bank, I discovered that the money had been transferred to a joint account I shared with my parents in case of emergencies. That account was barely used, so it hadn't crossed my mind to remove my parents' access. I never anticipated they'd betray me like that. I called my dad immediately. No answer. Then I tried my mom. She picked up on the second ring, and I could hear the quiver in her voice as she tried to explain that Nick was in serious trouble with credit card debt again, and he might lose his house if he didn't pay. They'd already sunk most of their available cash into bailing him out over the years, and he'd burned through their retirement accounts. He was on the brink of financial ruin. So, without asking me, without even a courtesy call, they took my money to cover Nick's debt. At that moment, I felt pure rage bubbling in my chest. They insisted they'd pay me back, but I wasn't naive enough to believe that. How could they pay me back if they'd already given almost everything to him? That night, I could hardly sleep. I kept replaying the conversation over in my mind, feeling the betrayal like a physical wound. I told Emily, and she was furious on my behalf. She wanted me to press charges, but I hesitated. It was still my family, after all, and I didn't want to escalate things to a point of no return. But I knew I couldn't let them walk all over me. I decided right then that I'd get my revenge in a way they'd never see coming. My job in financial consulting gave me certain skills, including knowledge of asset management and legal frameworks. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd show them how it's done. First, I filed a dispute with the bank, claiming an unauthorized transaction. It was partially true because I certainly hadn't authorized them to take my money. However, the complication was that my parents were co-signers on that account. Legally, it was as much theirs as it was mine, even though all the funds were from me. The bank initially refused to reverse the transaction, stating that any account holder could withdraw. Next, I tried to talk to a lawyer friend of mine. She advised me that pursuing a lawsuit could be an option, but it might get messy, expensive, and time-consuming. My parents could also claim they had every right to the funds. The law wasn't necessarily on my side unless I could prove some form of fraud or financial exploitation. That's when I realized I needed a plan that went beyond a simple lawsuit. I had to protect myself and simultaneously teach them a lesson they'd never forget. I started with damage control. I closed all joint accounts, credit lines, and anything that had my parents' names on it. I refinanced my condo to ensure no one else had a claim to it. I changed banks, locked my credit, and set up extra security measures. Then I went on a deep dive, rummaging through old paperwork and digital records related to my brother. Because of my job, I had some familiarity with the system. I knew how to research financial backgrounds, credit histories, and property records. Over a couple of weeks, I uncovered something interesting. Nick's house was still technically in my father's name because he never fully transferred ownership after purchasing it for Nick. He had a partial mortgage that my father was paying off. Nick was just living there rent-free. Furthermore, Nick had tens of thousands in unpaid taxes. My parents had tried to keep that hidden. It was a ticking time bomb, and if left unpaid, it could lead to a government lien or foreclosure. That gave me an idea. I had enough knowledge of how to tip off certain agencies. All it would take was a carefully composed letter to the right department. Normally, I wouldn't do something so drastic, but I was done playing nice. They had stolen from me, betrayed me, and effectively told me I wasn't worth an inheritance because I was too stable. Well, I was about to destabilize their precious golden child. Still, I needed a bit more leverage. I decided to watch Nick's credit activity. I know it sounds like I'm some sort of hacker, but in reality, I had limited but specialized knowledge. I couldn't directly access his credit reports, but I could piece together clues from the property records and prior bankruptcies. Then I discovered that Nick had co-signed a high-interest loan with Dad's name attached. The interest alone was enough to bury them if any payment was late. At this point, I had a two-pronged approach: tip off the authorities about Nick's delinquent taxes and let the bank know that one of the co-signers on that high-interest loan was in questionable financial standing. Before I pulled the trigger, I decided to have a face-to-face confrontation. I showed up at my parents' place unannounced, calmly asked them to return my money, and told them I was willing to compromise if they paid me at least half right away. My dad looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. My mom stammered about how they didn't have the money. Nick, ever the arrogant jerk, sauntered in from the other room and basically said, "You'll be fine, quit making a fuss." That sealed it. I realized they weren't going to make this right. I left without saying another word. A few days later, I made some calls and wrote some letters. I let the IRS know that the property was in my dad's name, but Nick was the one living in it and possibly generating unreported rental income. I may have embellished that part, but it was enough to trigger an investigation. Next, I contacted the bank that held that high-interest loan and let them know I had reason to believe the co-signer's financial situation was fraudulent. I pointed them to some public records indicating a history of bankruptcies and unpaid debts. I did all of this anonymously, of course. Then I sat back and waited, not quite sure how it would unfold, but trusting that it would cause enough chaos to get their attention. Within a few weeks, my parents were hit with a flurry of notices. My mother called me in a panic, begging for help. She said the bank was threatening to take action against them because of Nick's missed payments. She also mentioned that the IRS was investigating potential tax fraud tied to the house. Meanwhile, Nick was furious, trying to figure out who'd ratted him out. He posted this long rant on social media about snakes and backstabbers. I read it with a sense of grim satisfaction. He had no proof it was me, but deep down, I'm sure he suspected. I didn't respond, just watched the meltdown from the sidelines. Of course, things escalated. They owed thousands in back taxes and penalties. The bank threatened to foreclose if payments weren't caught up. Nick's credit was ruined beyond repair, and he was forced to sell his car to cover some immediate costs. My parents had to drain what was left of their retirement just to keep the house from being seized. It was poetic justice, but I didn't stop there. With my inside knowledge, I found a small legal loophole. Because the house was never fully transferred to Nick, my father was on the hook for every penny. If they tried to sell the property to recoup costs, Nick's disastrous financial history would scare away potential buyers. No one wanted a property tied to possible tax fraud. They were stuck. It was around this time that my dad finally broke his silence and called me. He demanded to know if I had anything to do with their sudden misfortunes. I stayed calm and told him I had no idea what he was talking about. He sputtered about how his life was in shambles and how Nick was on the verge of losing everything. I asked him calmly, "What about my money?" He went quiet, then mumbled that he'd pay me back eventually. There was no apology, no remorse. It was all about how I should help out because we're family. That's when I felt a bitter satisfaction. My parents had shown me how little my well-being mattered when they took my savings. Now they were reaping the consequences. Over the next few months, things continued to unravel for them. The investigation by the IRS wasn't a full-blown criminal case, but the back taxes, interest, and penalties piled up. Nick tried to move back in with my parents, who were now struggling to pay their own bills. My dad was forced out of retirement to pick up a part-time job. My mom sold possessions, including some heirlooms, to cover overdue mortgage payments. Meanwhile, I was focusing on my own life. I married Emily, with a small ceremony attended by her family and a few close friends. My parents weren't invited. Nick definitely wasn't. I sent them a polite announcement afterward. I'm sure it stung. A part of me wondered if I'd taken things too far, but then I reminded myself they had stolen from me without a hint of remorse. This was the consequence of that betrayal. My father tried one more time to salvage the situation. He asked me to buy the house from him at a discounted rate, hoping I'd bail them out of their predicament. I considered it momentarily. A chance to own a bigger property at a cheap price was tempting, but then I realized that would be another way they'd leech off me. I turned him down flat. He tried to guilt me, claiming I was letting them become homeless. I reminded him that they'd already decided how to distribute their assets when they die. Everything to Nick, so they could turn to him for help. Nick, predictably, had nothing. He blamed me for his problems, insisting that I manipulated our parents into cutting him off. The irony was painful. They'd never cut him off in the entire time I'd known him. But now he was no longer in a position to mooch. He started couch surfing at friends' places because his house was on the brink of foreclosure. My parents ended up selling it at a loss just to settle the back taxes and part of the mortgage. They moved into a cramped apartment. I heard from mutual acquaintances that my dad's health was suffering, and my mom was constantly worried. I won't pretend that I took pleasure in their suffering per se, but I won't deny feeling vindicated. This was the path they chose. They made their bed when they took my savings and gave my brother everything else. Of course, the extended family found out about the drama. Some relatives reached out to me, urging me to forgive and forget, but they didn't know the full story. I told them the bare minimum. My parents stole money from me to bail out Nick's debt, and I decided to protect myself. I refused to explain further. Why should I? People tried to guilt me by saying, "They're still your parents." I simply responded, "They didn't act like it." Eventually, the calls stopped because I wouldn't budge. Emily stood by me through all of it, reassuring me that I wasn't wrong for standing my ground. A year after everything blew up, I was in a much better place financially. My career was thriving. Emily and I were considering starting a family. One afternoon, out of the blue, my mom showed up at my office. She looked tired, older than her years, and tears filled her eyes the moment she saw me. She pleaded with me to help them. She said Nick was in worse shape than ever, going down a spiral of debt and depression. She also implied that if I didn't help, Nick might do something drastic. I felt a pang of guilt, but then I remembered that this was exactly how they manipulated me in the past, appealing to family ties, to pity, to fear. I told her I was sorry she was in that position, but I wouldn't be handing over any money. She tried to hug me, but I stepped back. That was the moment she truly realized how irreparable the damage was. After she left, I sat at my desk for a long time, feeling hollow. It's a strange mix of emotions when you seek revenge on your own family. Part of me wished none of this had happened, but another part remembered how powerless I felt when they took my money without hesitation. This outcome might not have been ideal, but it was justice in its own twisted way. Nick's life continued on a downward trajectory. He lost touch with most of his old friends, couldn't hold a job, and ended up with multiple judgments against him. Every so often, I hear from a friend of a friend that he's bragging about some new scheme or complaining that everyone is against him. My parents live in a constant state of regret, forced to acknowledge that the child they favored was actually the one who dragged them down. I won't lie. On some level, it's satisfying to see them finally face the consequences. They taught me that blood wasn't thicker than water when they gave me the short end of the stick and stole from me without remorse. From the day I was old enough to dream, I've carried a quiet determination inside me. My family, especially my parents, never saw anything special in me. They never once believed I had what it took to succeed, so they made it their mission to remind me of my shortcomings at every turn. That was the dynamic we had. They played it safe, living paycheck to paycheck, and acting like the idea of aiming higher was naive. If I tried to talk about what I wanted for my future, they'd either ignore me or laugh it off. My father, in particular, never missed a chance to say I was just a dreamer who'd end up with nothing. I can't count the number of times he told me to grow up and settle for some tedious 9-to-5, the kind that sucked away your soul and left you grateful for scraps. Even in high school, whenever I showed promise in anything, they'd shrug their shoulders and chalk it up to luck. To them, I was chasing fantasies that would never pan out. At first, their criticism stung, but over time, it fueled me. I promised myself that I'd make something out of my life, no matter how much they doubted me. I just never guessed the price I'd pay for proving them wrong. After graduating high school, I had no scholarships, no trust fund, and certainly no encouragement. I was on my own if I wanted to get anywhere. My parents told me to get a regular job at a local factory or fast food place. They insisted that I wasn't cut out for college or anything that required advanced skills. They basically washed their hands of me, telling me I'd just fail anyway. The day I moved out was the first time I felt true freedom. There was fear in my gut, but also a hunger to prove them all wrong. That hunger was stronger than any anxiety. I took a night shift job at a convenience store, using the meager paycheck to cover a tiny studio apartment and cheap instant meals. During the day, I devoured online tutorials about programming and web design. I knew that technology was a possible gateway to better opportunities, and no one could stop me from teaching myself. I lived on caffeine, ambition, and stubbornness. It took 2 years of fumbling around, failing, and learning, but eventually I got good enough to land freelance gigs. The pay was small at first, but it was something I earned on my own, using a skill no one bothered to teach me. My family had no clue how I managed to stay afloat, and frankly, they didn't care. They never visited, never offered to help, and only called when they wanted to rub salt in the wound. "Found a real job yet?" they'd ask, in that condescending tone that made my blood boil. I forced myself to stay polite, mostly to avoid giving them more reasons to gloat over my struggles. But their calls gradually stopped when it became clear I wasn't interested in begging them for anything. In a twisted way, their indifference fueled me even more. I learned programming languages, got better at web design, and built a decent portfolio. One client led to another, and soon I started making more than I ever had. When I finally landed a remote developer position at a tech startup, I felt like I was on the right track. I kept my head down, focusing on building my skills and saving money. I had no illusions about my family magically becoming supportive, so I didn't bother telling them about my job. They assumed I was just scraping by. Let them think that. The real turning point came when I decided to start my own software business. I'd discovered a niche in project management tools that mid-sized companies desperately needed but weren't being offered at reasonable prices. I spent months refining a prototype, working late into the night after my day job. I tested it with small clients and got promising feedback. By the time I secured a small investment from a venture capitalist who liked my pitch, I knew I was onto something. That was the moment I quit my developer job and went all in on my startup. The next 2 years were a whirlwind of stress, doubt, and relentless work. I hired a small team of freelancers to help build out the product, and we operated out of a cramped shared office space. My parents had no idea what I was doing, and I didn't volunteer any information. Whenever they bothered to call, it was the same script. Them asking if I had finally wised up or if I needed to come home and stop embarrassing myself. I bit my tongue every time. I knew arguing with them was pointless. It was better to let them assume I was just barely making rent. What they didn't know was that our product was slowly gaining traction. More clients signed on, our monthly revenue climbed, and before I knew it, we were turning a real profit. The venture capitalist who funded us introduced me to more investors, and soon, our little operation grew faster than I ever imagined. I was careful not to blow money on stupid expenses. Every cent I earned went back into the company or into my savings. By the 3rd year, I was making more in a quarter than I used to make in a year. It felt surreal, but also deserved. I had sacrificed any semblance of a normal life to build this. Eventually, the news reached my family through some relative who spotted me on LinkedIn, boasting about my startup's growth. That was when the phone calls started up again, only this time they had a different tone. My parents wanted to check in and see how I was doing, with an oddly warm vibe they'd never shown before. My father began calling me son in a way that implied we'd always been tight. My mother asked about my health, whether I was eating properly. My siblings, who barely spoke to me before, suddenly wanted to catch up and grab lunch. I wasn't naive. I knew exactly what was going on. They smelled money. As soon as they confirmed my success, they began hinting at family loyalty and how we should stick together. For years, I had accepted their dismissal of me. Now they came around acting like the past never happened. I played along at first, curious to see just how far they'd take this charade. But I knew one thing. I wasn't giving them a cent. Not after all the years they ridiculed me. The next family gathering I attended was a disaster waiting to happen. I hadn't seen them in years, but they insisted I come home for my mother's birthday. I decided to go for one reason only, to show them I wasn't the timid person they once knew. By then, I had a nice car and dressed better, but I didn't flaunt anything. I wasn't about to act like I was superior, but I also wasn't going to hide my success. The moment I walked in, I felt every pair of eyes on me. My father patted me on the shoulder and said, "Look who's finally come back. We're proud of you, you know." The hypocrisy made me want to laugh, but I kept a polite smile on my face. My mother hovered around me, offering me drinks and making a show of telling everyone how successful her little boy was. My siblings, cousins, and uncles all asked me about my business, feigning interest. I saw right through them, but I remained calm. Halfway through the evening, my father pulled me aside and said, "You know, your mother and I are getting older. We could use a little help with the mortgage and bills, and your sister's kids could use some support. We are family after all. Isn't it time you give back?" That was the moment I realized they fully expected me to hand over my hard-earned money. No apologies for the past, no acknowledgement of how they treated me. Just an entitled assumption that I owed them. I looked him in the eye and calmly said I wasn't comfortable funding anyone's life but my own. I reminded him that he had never once helped me or believed in me, so why should I shoulder his burdens now? He stared at me like I was speaking another language, then muttered something about me being an ungrateful son. That phrase stuck with me. Ungrateful son. It bounced around in my mind the rest of the night. I left the party early, ignoring the glares and muttered insults from my family. As soon as I got in my car, I exhaled the anger I'd been holding in. Over the next few weeks, their calls and texts escalated. They played the guilt card hard, accusing me of abandoning them, forgetting my roots, and turning my back on the people who raised me. I reminded them they never supported me or gave me a chance when I needed it most. I was done pretending otherwise. Then came the betrayal that shattered any lingering sentiment I might have had for them. My parents and siblings showed up at my startup's office one morning unannounced. The receptionist, who didn't know them, was baffled as they demanded to see the CEO. Word got to me, and I reluctantly let them in, trying not to cause a scene. They proceeded to berate me in front of my employees, calling me selfish and heartless, accusing me of forgetting where I came from. My father stood there, hands shaking with rage, yelling that I owed them for all the sacrifices they made raising me. The entire office went silent as my family hurled insults at me, called me a disgrace, and told me I wouldn't have survived without them. It was humiliating, infuriating, and above all, the final straw. I asked them to leave, and when they refused, I signaled security. My father tried to push past the guard, yelling that he'd sue me for abandonment or something ridiculous. By the time they were escorted out, the damage was done. My staff saw a side of me I never wanted them to see. My father's threats continued via voicemails and texts, claiming he'd talk to the press about how I was a horrible son who refused to care for his struggling parents. A few days later, one of our investors forwarded me an article from a local paper where my parents had given a sob story about how their son made millions and left them destitute. The article was full of half-truths and outright lies, painting me as some spoiled brat who refused to do the bare minimum for his own flesh and blood. My fury skyrocketed. They were trying to tarnish my reputation, hoping I'd cave under pressure and pay them off. Instead, I decided it was time for real revenge. Forgiveness was never an option now. All the anger I'd bottled up for years fueled my next moves. First, I hired a lawyer specializing in defamation. We gathered evidence of every false claim my parents made. The second step was a cease and desist letter demanding they retract their statements or face legal action. I knew they wouldn't comply and would probably escalate, but it was part of my plan. A week after receiving the letter, my father showed up at my apartment building, screaming about how I dared to threaten him with lawyers. Security was called again, and this time, I pressed charges for harassment. They still didn't back down. Instead, they ran another story in the local paper with even more outrageous claims, saying I threatened to ruin them financially. My lawyer and I struck back with a defamation lawsuit. This wasn't just a scare tactic. I was fully prepared to drag them to court. They had no idea how serious I was. Meanwhile, I started quietly making calls to certain people in our hometown, revealing the truth about how my family treated me. I had old acquaintances who remembered how dismissive my parents were. I shared my side of the story, showing them screenshots of the hateful messages I'd received from my family. The local newspaper editor got wind of these details and reached out to me for a statement. I decided to give an exclusive interview, calmly refuting every lie my parents told. By the end, public opinion shifted significantly. People saw my evidence, read about how I'd been mocked and dismissed for years, and realized my parents' sob story was a sham. It got even worse for them when the lawsuit proceeded. My family panicked because they couldn't afford legal representation to match mine. Their ridiculous claims crumbled under scrutiny. It became clear they only wanted a payday from me. In a last-ditch attempt, my siblings tried to contact me, pleading with me to drop the suit for the sake of family. They insisted they never wanted things to go this far, that they were pressured by our parents. They begged me for forgiveness, claiming they were caught in the middle. That was the point where I knew for certain that forgiveness wasn't an option. They could have reached out to me at any time before publicly humiliating me, but they didn't. They stood by our parents and tried to extort me. Now they wanted mercy. No, I refused. My lawyer and I pressed on. The suit never reached a dramatic trial, but the settlement negotiations were brutal. My family found themselves cornered. They had no evidence to support their lies, and every piece of documentation proved they defamed me deliberately. Their lawyer, clearly exasperated, eventually advised them to settle. The final agreement forced them to issue a public retraction and apology, along with a promise to never contact me again. They also had to pay a nominal amount in damages, which they struggled to come up with. I knew the sum would hurt them, but it wouldn't destroy them financially. I wasn't aiming to push them into homelessness. I just wanted them to feel the weight of their actions and be forced to admit they were wrong. There was no triumphant handshake, no tearful reconciliation. I walked out of that meeting with my head held high, determined to never speak to them again. Despite the settlement and public apology, I received hate messages from some distant relatives who still believed my parents' version of events. They claimed I'd ruined my own family out of spite. I chose to ignore them. The truth was out there, and anyone who cared to know it could see the facts. My parents stopped harassing me once they realized there was no money coming their way and that they had legally sworn to leave me alone. My siblings also withdrew, presumably furious that I hadn't given them a free ride. They were left with nothing but the bitter realization that their attempt to exploit me backfired spectacularly. It didn't make me happy or fill me with glee, but it brought me closure to know they couldn't hurt me anymore. I poured my energy back into my business, which continued to flourish. I expanded our product lines, hired more talented developers, and opened a second office in a major tech hub. My personal life improved too, as I allowed myself to finally relax and enjoy the fruits of my labor. I traveled, met new people, and even started dating again. Without the constant drama from my family overshadowing everything, I felt liberated. Occasionally, I'd remember how they called me an ungrateful son, and I'd wonder if I should feel guilty. But then I recalled the years of doubt, insults, and utter neglect. I had nothing to be sorry for. They made their bed, and I simply refused to lie in it with them. The years since have taught me that family isn't just about shared blood. It's about mutual respect, support, and genuine care. I found those qualities in friends, mentors, and colleagues who stood by me when my own relatives didn't. My life isn't perfect, but it's peaceful. I wake up each day knowing I earned everything I have. No one handed me success or guided me with a gentle hand. I clawed my way up from nothing, and when I finally triumphed, my family tried to swoop in and claim the rewards. Betrayal has no place in my heart anymore. I let my actions speak, and my actions said they would never lay their hands on my success. They called me ungrateful, but in the end, I merely gave them what they gave me for most of my life. Nothing. Sometimes people ask if I ever wish things had turned out differently. Sure, in a perfect world, I would have parents who supported me, siblings who cheered me on, and a family that took pride in my accomplishments for the right reasons. But that's not the hand I was dealt. I don't regret withholding my money from them. I don't regret the lawsuit. They forced my hand when they spread lies and tried to bully me into submission. My only regret is that I didn't cut them off sooner. I could have spared myself a lot of grief. If anyone reading this is going through something similar, remember that you're not obligated to give people who hurt you unlimited chances. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away and never look back. That's not cruelty, it's self-preservation. My family taught me the hard way that loyalty is a two-way street. They betrayed me, so I struck back and made sure they could never hurt me again. That's the closure I needed, and it still feels right to this day. Always. I never thought my own son would turn against me, not after all the time and love I poured into his life. My name is Daniel, and I'm 40 years old. My son, Trevor, is 15. He used to be my little shadow. Whether we were racing toy cars on the living room floor or working on model airplanes, it always felt like we were in our own world together. Things changed the day I discovered my wife Kelly was having an affair. We'd been married for over a decade, and I had no clue she was slipping away until I noticed that she guarded her phone like a priceless relic. When I confronted her, she tried to dodge the truth with vague excuses. Only after I showed her the phone bills and the messages did she finally admit it. She said I was boring and that she needed more excitement. It felt like someone had yanked my heart out of my chest. I filed for divorce, hoping to end things quickly to avoid an ugly fight. We lived in a region that favors mothers in custody arrangements, so the court granted Kelly primary custody of Trevor. I got visitation every other weekend and a month in the summer. I tried to be civil, but Kelly was livid about my refusal to work things out. She tried to spin the divorce as if I'd just abandoned her over a minor mistake. She never told Trevor the truth. Instead, she lied about why I left, painting me as a cold-hearted villain who'd turned his back on his family for no good reason. I never wanted to poison Trevor's mind with ugly details about his mother. I held back, thinking I could protect him from the full truth. I convinced myself that he'd see reason when he got older, that he'd realize there must be more to the story. But Kelly was relentless. She told him I'd never loved her enough to fight for our marriage. She told him I was too selfish to care about the family's needs. Every time I picked him up for a visit, I sensed his resentment. He was polite at first, but as the months passed, he barely spoke to me. Eventually, he refused to come over, and Kelly told me he didn't want anything to do with me. I remember one birthday in particular. Trevor had turned 14, and I wanted to surprise him. Kelly made it clear I wasn't invited to any celebration. She said he didn't want me there at all. It broke my heart. Even so, I tried sending a gift through my parents, hoping it might bridge the gap. Later, I discovered Trevor never received it. My mom told me he'd looked confused when she asked how he liked my present. It was obvious Kelly had intercepted it. But what stung more was Trevor's seemingly genuine belief that I'd never bothered to send anything in the first place. Over time, my frustration grew. My calls went unanswered, and my texts sat in the void. Letters I mailed to him were never acknowledged. He had every reason to think I'd washed my hands of him, even though I kept paying child support, never missed a deadline, and did everything the court required. I didn't want to drag Trevor into the bitter details, but I also hated that he saw me as a traitor. Finally, after nearly 2 years of estrangement, he agreed to meet me at a local burger place. He stepped inside, spotted me in a corner booth, and approached with a mix of anger and uncertainty in his eyes. He hardly looked at me as he sat down. His first words were, "Why didn't you even try to fix things?" His voice trembled with resentment. I felt a stab of guilt. I told him I had my reasons and that the situation was more complicated than he realized. He demanded to know what could be so complicated. I looked at his face, saw how lost he was, and decided I couldn't hide it any longer. I said, "Your mother was having an affair," and watched his eyes widen. He froze like he was trying to process a language he didn't speak. He insisted I was lying. He said his mother had told him I left because I was bored and restless, that I'd fallen out of love with her. I stayed calm and said I had proof. I told him I'd show him the phone records and text messages, but only if he really wanted to see them. He bit his lip and shook his head. Then, almost as if he wanted to catch me bluffing, he shrugged and told me to bring whatever evidence I had next time. He left without touching his burger. I spent that night digging out the old folder I'd kept in the back of my closet. It held the phone records, copies of the explicit texts I'd discovered, and the letter I'd written Kelly the day I filed for divorce. The letter described my heartbreak, how I felt utterly betrayed, and how I couldn't live with someone who never once apologized. I remember writing that I was doing my best to remain civil for Trevor's sake, yet Kelly still accused me of leaving her over nothing. When Trevor finally agreed to see me again, we met at the same place. I slid the folder across the table. He stared at it for a long moment before flipping it open. I watched his eyes move back and forth, scanning the texts, phone calls, timestamps, the works. He didn't speak. When he reached the letter, he read it twice, his breathing shallow. Finally, he looked up, tears brimming, and whispered, "She never told me any of this." He sounded more hurt than angry. I told him I was sorry I hadn't been honest sooner. I explained that I was trying to spare him pain. He let out a shaky exhale and asked if it was true that Kelly never once tried to reconcile. I said it was. He wanted to know if she'd apologized. I told him she never did, only blamed me for not being interesting enough. He sank back into his seat, silent for a long time. Eventually, he stood up, said, "I need time to think," and walked out. I worried he might never speak to me again. A few days later, he sent me a text. He apologized for being cold all these years and asked if I had more evidence. I scanned the folder's contents into a PDF and emailed them to him. I didn't hear back for a while, but then my phone buzzed one evening. It was Trevor, asking if he could come over. I was so relieved. I told him I'd pick him up wherever he wanted. He chose to meet in front of an old bookstore near Kelly's place. He hopped into my car, and we drove in silence until we reached my apartment. That night, he asked me to describe the day I confronted Kelly. I recalled how I'd calmly shown her the texts, how she'd shifted blame onto me, calling me distant and overly focused on work. Trevor's jaw tightened when I said she never once admitted she was wrong, never once asked me to reconsider. He asked me why I hadn't demanded custody if she was the one who broke our family. I explained that the court system usually favors the mother, especially if the kid is used to living with her. I told him I never wanted a vicious custody battle because I couldn't bear to see him dragged through that. I wanted him to have as much stability as possible, so I compromised. He stayed the night and opened up about how Kelly had told him I was stingy with money, never gave emotional support, and barely paid attention to him. He said he believed it because she showed him no letters, no gifts, no calls. He assumed I just never sent them. I told him the truth. I sent birthday cards every year, along with gifts through his grandparents. Kelly must have intercepted them. His hands shook as he realized how many lies he'd been fed. When I drove him back to Kelly's the next day, he hugged me goodbye. I noticed he clenched his jaw before stepping out of the car, like he was bracing for a fight. Sure enough, he told me later that Kelly bombarded him with questions and tried to guilt trip him. She denied everything, insisting I was a master manipulator. Trevor didn't believe her. He started spending more time at my place, sometimes the whole weekend. Kelly lashed out, sending me angry texts accusing me of turning Trevor against her. She threatened court action again, which sounded absurd because all Trevor wanted was to hear the truth. Eventually, I'd had enough of her threats. I contacted my lawyer about revisiting custody. Trevor was old enough to express his preference. We compiled evidence of parental alienation, the intercepted gifts, the texts where she explicitly told me Trevor hated me, and her manipulative messages blaming me for everything. We filed a petition to modify custody on the grounds that Kelly was undermining my parental relationship. Kelly, of course, tried to spin a story that I was manipulating Trevor to hate her, but Trevor was ready to speak on my behalf. When we went to court, Trevor testified about how his mother lied to him for years, how she hid the truth behind the divorce, and how she deliberately kept him from having any contact with me. I also showed the judge copies of the threatening messages Kelly sent, which made her look unhinged. She kept insisting that I was lying, but she had nothing to support her claims. The court ruled in my favor, giving me primary custody. Kelly was granted supervised visitation until she could prove she was willing to co-parent without manipulation. She lost it in the courthouse hallway, screaming that I was ruining her life. Trevor stood by my side, stone-faced, while security led her away. On the ride home, Trevor said he felt conflicted. Part of him still loved Kelly. I told him that was normal. She's his mother, and love doesn't disappear overnight. But I also told him he had every right to be angry. I admitted that I was still angry, not just about the affair, but about the damage she did to our relationship. I had no intention of forgiving her. She had taken our son's trust in me and shattered it for her own convenience. I'd spent years aching for the boy who used to idolize me. Now he finally understood my side, and we both saw the cost of her deceit. Kelly's reaction was predictable. She called, leaving voicemails accusing me of stealing her son. She wrote long messages trying to convince Trevor that she was the victim. Sometimes he'd read them out loud to me, shaking his head at the level of manipulation. He told her repeatedly that he needed time and space to process the lies she had told. She refused to accept that answer, so Trevor blocked her number for a while. The court-appointed supervisor also documented her attempts to turn him against me during their visits. All this time, I held on to a simmering rage. I thought about how she'd humiliated me with her affair, how she'd lied to Trevor about my character, and how she'd never shown an ounce of genuine remorse. Then I remembered her affair partner. He was married too. For a long time, I considered it none of my business to contact his wife. I believed that stooping to that level might just create more drama. But after watching Trevor suffer so much, I decided I wasn't going to let that man walk away unscathed. He'd made his choices, just like Kelly did. I found his wife on social media. She had pictures of them together, smiling in a way that made me sick to my stomach. It looked so familiar, like the facade Kelly and I once had. I messaged her saying that her husband had been involved with my ex-wife. I attached some of the texts and phone records. I didn't embellish anything. I let the evidence speak for itself. She responded politely, said she wasn't entirely surprised, and thanked me for sending the proof. She told me she'd handle it on her end and wished me luck. That was the last I heard from her. I could only assume the fallout rocked his marriage the way it rocked mine. After the custody ruling, Kelly's life went downhill. Word spread at her workplace that she'd lied in court. Projects she was leading were reassigned. Her professional reputation took a hit. Her own parents found out about her manipulations and apologized to me for believing her side at first. They admitted she'd always spun stories to avoid responsibility, but they never imagined she'd go so far as to weaponize Trevor's love. They still tried to maintain a relationship with her, but I could tell even they were keeping a distance. Trevor started therapy. At first, he was hesitant, but the counselor helped him process his confusion, anger, and lingering sadness. It wasn't easy for him to reconcile the mother he'd grown up with and the lying manipulator he was now seeing. At one point, he asked me if he was allowed to forgive her. I said that decision was his alone. I told him I wouldn't hold it against him if he chose to give her another chance. But he said he wasn't ready. He said he felt betrayed and needed more time. I supported whatever path he chose. One day, Trevor surprised me by asking if we could meet Kelly together in a neutral setting. We arranged a supervised session at the counselor's office. Kelly sobbed, telling him she was sorry for how things turned out. Trevor remained composed, asking her why she lied for so long. She tried to blame stress, tried to claim she'd worried about losing him, but her excuses rang hollow. At the end, Trevor told her, "I don't hate you, but I can't trust you." I saw the shock register on her face. She'd likely hoped for a tearful reunion. When we left, Trevor looked conflicted but also determined, like a weight had been lifted. He told me he still loved her in some way but didn't see a path to trust her again. I said I understood and that however he decided to handle his relationship with her, I'd back him up. I had no pity left for Kelly. I wanted her to feel every consequence of her betrayal. She was the one who'd chosen to cheat. She was the one who spent years lying about me. In my eyes, she'd done nothing to earn my forgiveness. Over the next few months, Kelly's behavior pushed the court to extend the supervised visitation. She showed up late, argued with the supervisor, and tried to slip in negative comments about me whenever she could. It all went into the record. My lawyer kept me informed. The judge noted that Kelly refused to cooperate, so there was no reason to lift the restrictions. Her rants on social media only made her look more unstable. She posted long tirades about how I stole Trevor, accusing me of turning him into a heartless traitor. People who knew the real story started calling her out. Some unfriended her. She found herself increasingly isolated. Meanwhile, Trevor thrived. He made new friends, improved his grades, and joined the school track team. He started talking about colleges he wanted to visit. We spent weekends tinkering with his old model rockets, a nostalgic activity that brought us closer. On one of those Saturdays, he took a break from painting a rocket fin, looked at me, and said, "I'm glad we're finally past all that stuff." I nodded, but I couldn't deny the lingering bitterness. I felt robbed of the years I'd spent as his enemy in his eyes. I refused to let that bitterness consume me entirely, though. My focus remained on being there for Trevor. We formed new routines. We adopted a rescue dog that Trevor named Jazz, and the two of them became inseparable. My parents visited more often, thrilled to have their grandson back in their lives without Kelly blocking access. Trevor got to see the bigger family picture he'd missed. Uncles, aunts, cousins who'd previously been kept at arm's length. He joked about how many people had tried to reach out to him over the years, all while he thought everyone had abandoned him. Kelly continued to beg for unsupervised time with Trevor. She tried to spin new stories about how she'd changed, or how I was controlling the narrative. I never blocked her from communicating with him. The phone lines were open if he wanted to call her, but Trevor often chose not to. He said talking to her still made him anxious. He couldn't forgive the way she twisted his view of me. He told me that if she had just admitted she was wrong, things might have been different. Once, he asked me why I didn't forgive her and move on. I told him forgiveness is a personal choice, and I couldn't force it. I explained that I'd moved on in many ways. I had a new sense of peace, a growing bond with him, and a life free of her deceit. But I had no interest in pretending that what she did was acceptable. She'd gone beyond the single act of cheating. She robbed me of 2 years with my son, years I'd never get back. That wasn't something I was willing to pardon, and I didn't think I owed her any reconciliation. Still, I couldn't deny there was some satisfaction in seeing her world crumble. Her affair partner's marriage likely imploded once his wife learned the truth. Kelly's professional reputation took a dive. Her closest friends distanced themselves, not wanting to be caught in her dramas. Even her family approached me privately to ask for forgiveness for the way they treated me after the divorce. They told me Kelly had fed them the same lies she'd told Trevor. It took time, but eventually they realized I wasn't the monster she'd painted me to be. Trevor found closure by telling Kelly exactly how her actions affected him. He laid it out in a therapy session: the lost birthdays, the bitterness he felt toward me, the alienation from my side of the family. She cried and insisted she never intended for things to go that far. He shook his head and said, "You made the choice. You lied and kept lying." It was brutal, but honest. I felt a surge of grim satisfaction, not because I enjoyed seeing her hurt, but because Trevor finally had the chance to speak his truth. Life gradually settled into a comfortable pattern. With primary custody, I helped Trevor navigate school projects, watched him excel in athletics, and cheered him on at every meet. My parents visited often, showering him with the affection they'd been saving up. Kelly's role became minimal, limited to supervised visits that Trevor sometimes chose to skip if he felt too stressed to see her. The court reviewed the arrangement every few months, and each time, they extended it because Kelly never showed true cooperation. One evening, as Trevor and I were sharing a pizza, he said he was finally at peace with everything. He recognized that Kelly was still his mother, but he had no illusions about who she was. He appreciated that I never stopped trying to contact him, even when he ignored me. He said, "You had every right to give up, but you didn't." I told him I could never give up on him. We might have lost precious time, but I intended to make the most of every day we had going forward. Not long after, Kelly tried one last desperate tactic, sending me a lengthy email stating she had new evidence that I'd coerced Trevor into lying in court. I forwarded it straight to my lawyer, who advised me to ignore her. She threatened a lawsuit, threatened to expose me to the community, but had nothing to back up her words. She was flailing, and everyone, including Trevor, saw it. He shrugged it off, saying, "That's just mom being mom." He wasn't even upset, more annoyed than anything. My own anger never fully vanished, but it turned into determination to be the best father I could be, to fill our home with trust and honesty, and to never allow lies to fester again. I kept copies of everything as a reminder of how far we'd come. Trevor eventually concluded that people like Kelly don't just change because they're caught. They have to want to change, and she clearly didn't. When she realized I wasn't going to buckle or soften, she finally fell silent. Today, Trevor is focused on his next chapter. He talks about college and future plans, and I'm saving every penny to help him get there. He wants to study engineering, something that feels symbolic given how he once loved to build things with me. It's like he's channeling all that frustration and creativity into a positive goal. Every now and then, he mentions his mother, wondering if there'll ever be a time he can talk to her without feeling that wrenching ache. I tell him maybe, maybe not. It's a process. He doesn't owe her a clean slate. She made her bed, and now she's lying in it. I can't say I've found it in my heart to forgive Kelly. I doubt I ever will. That might make me sound harsh, but betrayal and manipulation aren't things you brush off with a polite apology. especially not when they drive a wedge between a father and his child. My revenge, if you can call it that, was letting the truth speak for itself. It cost her my son's trust, her professional credibility, and the comfortable life she once had. I did eventually show her affair partner's wife the proof of his infidelity, so he faced the fallout too. I have zero regrets about that. If Kelly were a better person, she would have admitted her mistakes. She would have tried to help Trevor heal instead of feeding him more lies. Instead, she fought tooth and nail to keep him in the dark. She failed. Now Trevor sees her for who she is, and our relationship is stronger than ever. That, to me, is a victory worth savoring. Sometimes, when I see Trevor concentrating on a new project or cracking jokes with my parents, I think about all we nearly lost. Kelly tried to steal those moments from both of us. I won't pretend there's some tidy bow on the whole situation. Life is messy, and some scars don't fully fade, but at least my son knows I love him. At least he understands the truth behind our fractured family. That's all I ever wanted. Kelly can keep her bitterness. She earned it. Trevor occasionally wrestles with the question of whether to cut Kelly out entirely or maintain some minimal contact. The court allows supervised visits, but he's not obligated to go if he doesn't feel up to it. Sometimes he's curious, sometimes he's angry, sometimes he's indifferent. I support him either way. My role is to be there for him, not to push him toward decisions that might hurt him more. He's come a long way since that first shaky meeting in the burger place. He once asked if I truly believed people like Kelly could love anyone but themselves. I told him I don't know. Maybe she does love him in her own broken way, but she loved herself more. That's why she cheated, lied, and never apologized. That's why she kept spinning stories instead of setting him free with the truth. He seemed sad at first, but then he nodded. Accepting that your parent is flawed, sometimes deeply flawed, isn't easy, but it's part of growing up. I look back and realize how close I came to losing Trevor forever. I'm grateful I found the courage to lay everything out, even though I dreaded hurting him. Kelly's betrayal extended beyond me. She betrayed Trevor too, by using him as a weapon. That's not something I can forgive. And I'm okay with that. I don't need to reconcile with her to have peace. My peace is found in knowing the truth prevailed, and my son is by my side. If there's one lesson this entire mess taught me, it's that silence can be just as destructive as lies. I stayed quiet because I thought I was protecting my child. In reality, my silence became a weapon Kelly used against me. The moment I finally spoke up, everything changed. It was painful, but it broke the spell she'd woven around him. Now he sees the situation clearly. We lost time we can never get back, but at least we're moving forward without any illusions. Kelly tried to break me by turning Trevor against me, but all she managed to do was show me how important it is to fight for what really matters. When Trevor realized the truth, she lost the power she once had. She tried using the court system to bully me, but the evidence spoke louder than her hollow accusations. She tried to sway public opinion with sob stories, but people found out who was really lying. In the end, she stands alone, forced to live with the consequences of her own choices. Trevor and I, on the other hand, have rebuilt our bond brick by brick. We don't talk much about Kelly's affair anymore. We focus on what's ahead. He knows I won't lie to him. He trusts me to tell him the truth, even when it's difficult. That trust was hard-won, and I don't take it for granted. Whenever I see him succeed, whether it's in school or sports, I feel a wave of pride knowing that we overcame all that poison Kelly tried to drip into his ears. He still has the folder of evidence I gave him. Sometimes he says he reads through it to remind himself how easily he can be deceived if he only listens to one side. It hurts him to think of how many years he spent hating me, but I tell him not to dwell on the past. We can't change it. We can only learn from it. Kelly's lies, her betrayal, and her refusal to take accountability all serve as a cautionary tale for him. I wish he didn't have to learn that lesson at such a young age, but life doesn't always give us gentle lessons. To this day, Kelly hasn't offered a genuine apology. She's tried to cover her tracks with crocodile tears and claims of misunderstanding, but Trevor's not buying it. As for me, I'm done with her games. She crossed a line when she weaponized my son's love against me. I won't forgive that. My revenge is letting her stew in the reality she created. If she wants to know why her own son doesn't trust her, she can flip through those messages and see her own words. That's on her. Now, every time I see Trevor smile, I'm reminded that we survived. He's safe under my roof, free from the manipulations that once warped his view of me. Kelly's attempts to regain full custody have all failed because the court sees how unhealthy her influence can be. Trevor's voice carries weight, and he's spoken loud and clear. He doesn't want to live with a parent who spent years lying to him. I back him up 100%. Sometimes people ask if I ever regret not trying to salvage the marriage. My answer is always no. A relationship without trust isn't worth saving. I didn't end things lightly. I ended them because Kelly gave me no reason to believe in her. Cheating was bad enough, but the real betrayal was what she did afterward, dragging our son into a web of deceit. That was the final nail in the coffin. Even if she came crawling back with an apology, I wouldn't give her the time of day. Trevor and I live our lives without the shadow of her manipulations. He's a bright kid with big aspirations, and I'm here to encourage him in every step. If Kelly ever truly changes and proves it, that's between her and Trevor, but I have zero obligation to open that door again. She slammed it shut the moment she decided to use my son as a tool for her revenge. I'll never forget how he looked at me like I was a monster, all because of her lies. Some wounds run too deep to heal with a few empty words. I don't believe in forgiving someone who's never shown true remorse. Maybe that makes me harsh, but I can live with that. The best revenge is living well and raising Trevor to understand he deserves honesty and respect in all his relationships. He learned that lesson the hard way, and I believe it will guide him in the future. As for Kelly, she made her bed long ago. I'm just the man who refused to keep quiet about the truth. My conscience is clear. My son is finally where he belongs, and that's all that matters. I never expected my marriage to collapse so quickly. We'd been married for 5 years, and I thought we had a good rhythm. We woke up every day, had breakfast, and talked about our plans. We discussed finances, how many kids we wanted, and whether it was time to move into a bigger house. It wasn't the most thrilling life, but I liked the stability. My wife and I met in college, and we'd always been open with each other about our goals and concerns. When she told me she had a mandatory work trip for a new project, I didn't think twice. We'd been through periods of distance before, and they never caused any problems. I trusted her, so I helped her pack, kissed her goodbye, and figured that was that. But when she came back, it was like I was living with a stranger, and I felt lost. I noticed the first change that evening. She used to greet me with a hug or at least a tired smile, but she just brushed past me with a distracted wave. She vanished into the bedroom without offering an explanation. I tried not to overthink it. Maybe she was exhausted or upset about something that happened on the trip. I gave her some space, hoping she'd open up when she was ready. A few days later, she casually mentioned she'd been seeing a therapist. My initial reaction was relief. It meant she was trying to address whatever was bothering her. I figured maybe she was stressed out from the project. I told her I supported it, that therapy was a great idea, but whenever I asked questions, she'd clam up. I started feeling a slow dread that something more complicated was at play, but I couldn't prove yet. Confusion remained. She was glued to her phone all the time, sending messages under the table when we ate, or disappearing into the bathroom for half an hour. I tried to respect her privacy, but I wondered who she was texting. Whenever I asked, she'd say it was work or her therapist. One night, I saw her screen light up with a name I recognized, Emily. Emily went to high school with my wife. They weren't close friends, just acquaintances. It seemed odd she was suddenly on my wife's contacts. I asked why she was talking to Emily after all these years, and she shrugged, saying Emily was giving her advice. She even claimed Emily was a therapist now, which explained everything. I considered reaching out to verify, but I didn't want to break my wife's trust. I kept quiet, trying to maintain calm, yet the pit in my stomach grew deeper. Things took a sharp turn when she said she wanted an open relationship. I was blindsided. We'd never discussed anything like that, and it felt like a slap in the face. She dropped it casually over dinner, like it was no big deal, saying it could save our marriage. I tried to ask where this idea was coming from, and she repeated that it was recommended by her therapist. I pressed further, but she refused to give details. She insisted this was the key to happiness and that I'd be unfair if I didn't at least consider it. I was shocked, angry, and desperate to understand. I asked if she was already seeing someone else, and she denied it with a dismissive shrug. My gut told me otherwise. The next day, she told me to think carefully because if I didn't agree, she might have to end things. I panicked. I was torn between my love for her and the utter shock I felt. I tried to have a serious conversation about our vows, about everything we'd built together. She refused to engage. She insisted I was being narrow-minded and clinging to outdated notions of fidelity. I started to suspect that Emily was behind this shift, so I asked a mutual friend if Emily really was a licensed therapist. He said he doubted it. Emily had apparently dropped out of college and bounced around odd jobs. There was no record of her attending any graduate program. My heart sank. I confronted my wife, and she doubled down, insisting Emily was legitimate. She accused me of not trusting her word. Later, she texted me a link to some website that looked sketchy at best, supposedly confirming Emily's credentials. It only deepened my suspicions that I was being lied to. I fumed. I tried to save the marriage by suggesting couples counseling. She refused. She insisted she already had professional help and didn't need more. Her phone conversations with Emily became more frequent, and she'd lock herself in the spare room for hours. Sometimes I heard snippets of their talk. They'd giggle about men, about how I was too controlling, about how she deserved to explore her desires. It stung like hell. One night, I finally cracked and checked her phone while she showered. I know it was an invasion of privacy, but I was desperate. I found messages from Emily that read more like a friend egging someone on to cheat than any real therapist advice. Emily wrote things like, "He'll never find out if you're careful," and "You have one life. Don't waste it on a prude." My hands trembled as I scrolled, my worst fears confirmed. My stomach churned. When I confronted her with these texts, she flew into a rage. She accused me of violating her trust and told me I was the reason she needed an open relationship. According to her, I was stifling her growth and ignoring her needs. I reminded her that she hadn't even mentioned feeling neglected before this so-called therapy. She threw a glass across the kitchen and called me a hypocrite for snooping. Nothing made sense anymore. She stormed out and spent the night who knows where. I stayed up, hands shaking, trying to figure out where everything went wrong. I reread some of the messages I'd saved. Emily even wrote, "If he doesn't comply, you have every right to leave him for someone fun." It felt like my wife was being coached to destroy our marriage. I realized that nothing I said would change her mind. I felt utterly powerless then. The next few days were the worst. She hardly came home, and when she did, she avoided me. She'd go straight to the guest room, lock the door, and talk on the phone with Emily for hours. At one point, she said she was heading out to meet someone. I asked if it was a date. She smirked and said, "You wanted to keep me from living my life, so I'm taking it back." My heart pounded. I felt like I was watching my wife turn into a stranger right before my eyes. The next morning, I saw an unfamiliar car parked down the street, and I had a sinking feeling it was related to her newfound freedom. That same day, she demanded we separate our finances so she could have the freedom to do as she pleased. She was fast-tracking the destruction of our life together. I felt numb. I started collecting evidence. I took screenshots of everything on her phone I could find, including her chats with Emily. I saved records of her sudden financial moves. I researched local divorce attorneys, even though I felt sick doing it. I wanted to see if I had any legal recourse if she tried to bleed me dry. Part of me still wanted to believe she'd come around, that this was some kind of phase. But the more I saw, the clearer it became. She wasn't just seeking an open marriage. She wanted an escape from me, as if our entire relationship had been a mistake. Late at night, I heard her laughing on the phone with Emily, using words like freedom, excitement, and finally living. It was like a knife in my chest. I knew I had to prepare for the worst, even if it broke my heart. I felt shattered. Then I got a text from an unknown number. It was Emily. She basically told me to stop interfering with my wife's happiness and let her do whatever she wanted. She said I was being selfish and controlling, and that I should try being a man who can handle a strong, independent woman. It took every ounce of willpower not to respond with pure rage. Instead, I blocked the number and doubled down on my plans. I gathered more evidence, including screenshots of Emily's fake credentials. I asked a friend with some tech skills to see if that website was real. He confirmed it was a cheap template site with no legitimate licensing. I confronted my wife again, showing her the proof. She accused me of fabricating everything, called me paranoid, and threatened to move out if I kept attacking Emily. It felt like a losing battle. I was furious. I didn't forgive her. I had no interest in letting this slide. If she wanted to blow up our marriage, fine, but I refused to be a passive victim. I met with a divorce attorney who specialized in protecting clients from hostile spouses. I handed over everything: texts, financial records, notes on Emily's involvement. He gave me a clear strategy: document everything, do not leave the marital home unless forced, and safeguard my finances. I also reached out to a private investigator, hoping I could confirm if my wife was having an affair. The PI suggested phone records, tracking her vehicle, and gathering photographic evidence. It all felt surreal, but I had to protect myself. Late one night, I finally looked myself in the mirror and realized I couldn't fix this anymore. I was done trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. My resolve hardened. I felt unwavering. 2 weeks later, I had enough evidence to confirm she was seeing another man. The PI captured photos of her meeting a guy at a hotel, looking very cozy. My attorney advised me not to confront her just yet. He said it would be more advantageous to keep collecting information until we filed for divorce. Meanwhile, she grew bolder, hardly bothering to hide her late-night outings. When I asked where she was going, she gave vague answers or rolled her eyes. Emily continued to pump nonsense into her head, urging her to live a little and treat me like an obstacle to overcome. I stopped caring about her justifications. My focus shifted to preparing for legal war. I set up a separate bank account, changed my passwords, and quietly removed valuables from the house. It felt cutthroat, but she'd left me no choice. My trust was obliterated. I felt livid. The day I filed for divorce, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. I didn't tell her right away. I wanted to finalize everything before she could sabotage me. My attorney fast-tracked the papers, citing adultery and irreconcilable differences. I had photographs, text messages, and even testimonies from a couple of friends who'd witnessed her with other men. The moment finally came when she was served. She burst into the house, screaming at me for betraying her. The irony was almost too much to bear. She threatened to take everything, to ruin my reputation, to make me regret ever crossing her. I stayed calm, reminding myself that my attorney had prepared me for this exact scenario. She tossed clothes into a suitcase, yelling about how Emily said I was emotionally abusive for not letting her have her fun. I stood there, silent, refusing to engage. I felt resolute. She packed up and left that evening, slamming the door so hard the frames on the wall rattled. I felt an immediate sense of emptiness, followed by a wave of relief. I spent a sleepless night sifting through memories, wondering how we had gone from planning a future to this. Early the next morning, I got a text from Emily. "You're making a huge mistake. She deserves better." I ignored it. As the days passed, I dove into preparations for the legal battle. My attorney assured me the evidence was solid. Meanwhile, I discovered she'd moved in with the guy from the hotel pictures. Emily kept sending me messages, each more scathing than the last, calling me small-minded and pathetic. I saved them all. I decided to use every shred of proof showing how Emily manipulated my wife. I wanted no mercy, just a clean, decisive victory. I was unstoppable. Months passed and the divorce proceedings dragged on. She tried to contest everything, from the division of assets to spousal support. My lawyer stayed vigilant, hitting back with proof of her affair and her reckless spending. At one point, she claimed I was abusive, but we provided messages that contradicted her lies. Emily was present at every hearing, smirking in my direction as though she'd won. Whenever I caught her eye, I felt a surge of determination. I would not lose to these two. Eventually, the judge saw through their nonsense. My wife's demands were slashed considerably. She ended up with only a fraction of what she initially wanted. The day the final decree was issued, she glared at me in disbelief. Emily was fuming. I didn't celebrate, though. I felt relief, but there was still a dull ache from the betrayal. I wasn't done yet. My revenge wasn't over. I gathered the evidence of Emily's fake therapy practice and sent it anonymously to her state's licensing board. I included screenshots, website data, and a detailed account of how she manipulated my wife under the guise of therapy. I knew she wasn't a licensed therapist, but I wanted an official body to investigate. I also found out where Emily worked, some small wellness center that touted spiritual healing. I sent them a package with all the proof, making it clear she was falsely advertising herself. Word got around quickly, and soon Emily lost her position. She tried to retaliate by harassing me online, calling me every name under the sun, but I had enough documentation to press charges for defamation if she continued. She backed off. My ex-wife heard about it and tried to confront me, but I told her it was none of her business anymore. I refused her pleas. Not long after, I learned Emily faced a hefty fine and possible charges for practicing without a license. People who'd gone to her for counseling came forward with complaints. Apparently, she'd broken confidentiality, offered reckless advice, and caused more harm than good. I felt a grim satisfaction. I never forgave her for meddling in my marriage and encouraging my wife to cheat. I watched from a distance as her world crumbled. My ex-wife tried to play the victim, saying I'd ruined Emily's life out of spite. I countered that Emily had no right to destroy ours in the first place. The truth eventually came out in our social circle. Emily was a fraud, and my wife had followed her blindly. Some mutual friends cut ties with them both. That was fine by me. I didn't want any part of their toxicity. My revenge felt justified. I had zero regrets left. As for my ex-wife, she moved in with that guy. I heard rumors they fought constantly. She tried to blame their problems on me, saying the stress of the divorce had changed her, but nobody bought it. I kept my distance and focused on rebuilding my life. I moved into a smaller apartment, sold the old house, and used the proceeds to clear debts and start fresh. I got back into hobbies I'd abandoned, spent time with supportive friends, and even booked a solo trip to clear my head. Every so often, I'd get a pitiful text from her saying she missed certain things about our life together. I never replied. She made her bed. Emily was out of the picture, dealing with her legal nightmare. Meanwhile, I learned to breathe again without the weight of betrayal on my back. I felt free for the first time. I embraced independence. One day, I got a call from my lawyer. He told me my ex-wife wanted to renegotiate the divorce settlement, claiming financial hardship. She apparently couldn't pay her bills, and her new boyfriend wasn't as supportive as she'd hoped. My lawyer asked if I wanted to consider it. Without hesitation, I said no. I'd already been bled enough, and the court had ruled fairly the first time. She'd made her choices. I felt a certain grim pleasure in denying her. I didn't owe her compassion after she ripped our marriage apart. Word traveled back that she was furious, blaming Emily for giving her terrible advice and me for not bailing her out. But her outrage didn't faze me. I was done with her manipulations, done with the toxic cycle. The final piece of revenge was simply refusing to be her safety net. I felt vindicated. No mercy, no forgiveness now. Looking back, I realize I've changed. The naive husband who believed in unshakable loyalty is gone. I didn't forgive her betrayal. I didn't forgive Emily's interference. I took my revenge by dismantling their lies and exposing their fraud. Some might say I became vindictive, but I see it as self-preservation. I refuse to be victimized any longer. It's not a happy ending, but it's my ending. I'm free from someone who decided I wasn't enough, who let a fake therapist convince her to abandon everything we built. And Emily? She's facing legal consequences for her sham practice. My ex-wife has to live with the choices she made, choices that cost her any sympathy I might have offered. I'm not sorry for what I did. I own every step of my revenge. At least now I can move on without the weight of betrayal haunting me, and I feel victorious. Now, my name is Rachel, and I never imagined I'd be writing this kind of story for anyone to see. I'm 32 years old, a single mother to my 10-year-old son Robbie, and until recently, I had a sister. Her name is Felicia, and we used to be as close as two people could be, at least in my memories. Looking back, I see how much resentment she held, but I kept overlooking warning signs because I believed in family. We grew up in a comfortable home with our father, who tried to give us both equal opportunities. Despite that, Felicia always suspected he favored me, though I never saw evidence of any special treatment. Over the years, minor jealousy turned into passive-aggressive comments, mostly about how I was taking advantage of Dad's generosity. But nothing prepared me for the day she used my son as her pawn in twisted revenge. It all happened at Felicia's house, during her daughter's birthday party, a celebration meant to bring our families together. Robbie wasn't feeling well that morning, but he insisted on going because he adores his cousin, Lily. He has mild asthma and was on the tail end of a cold, so I made sure he had his inhaler. Felicia seemed fine at first, greeting us with a forced but polite smile, her arms crossed like she couldn't relax. I chalked it up to stress, so I tried helping in the kitchen, but every time I offered, she brushed me off. muttering something under her breath that I couldn't quite catch. I noticed Robbie looked pale, so I asked if there was a quiet spot for him to rest while the kids played. Felicia said her basement had a couch, so I led Robbie downstairs, never suspecting she'd turn off the heat. The basement itself was mostly finished, but there was a distinct chill in the air, which I assumed was normal. I helped Robbie lie down, pulled a blanket over him, and told him I'd bring him a warm drink soon. After about 15 minutes, I came back with some tea, only to find the basement door locked from the outside. I jiggled the handle, knocked, and called Robbie's name, panic building when I realized he was trapped behind it. I shouted for Felicia or anyone nearby, but the music upstairs drowned me out, and nobody seemed to hear. When I finally heard footsteps, it was Felicia, acting annoyed, saying she must have accidentally locked it after checking laundry. She opened the door, and I found Robbie shivering, teeth chattering, the basement feeling colder than before. Later, I learned she'd cut the heat to that level deliberately, to make a point. As soon as I got Robbie upstairs, I noticed how flushed and short of breath he was, his inhaler helping. Felicia offered no apology, rolled her eyes, and claimed I was overreacting as though she hadn't trapped him. I was furious, but my main concern was Robbie's health, so I grabbed our coats and said we were leaving. That's when Felicia decided to unleash her anger, accusing me of always stealing the spotlight and using Dad's money. She spat out that locking Robbie in the basement was a wake-up call for me to stop mooching off everyone. At that point, my voice shook with rage as I told her she'd crossed the line, nearly endangering Robbie's life. Her husband, Greg, walked in on our argument, and the moment he heard what happened, I saw him turn pale. I stormed out with Robbie, but Greg followed, apologizing, promising he'd handle Felicia. Once I got Robbie home, I gave him his medication and let him rest while I seethed, replaying Felicia's words. It wasn't just sibling rivalry anymore. She had targeted my child, risking his health to teach me a lesson. I called Dad that evening, furious, and let everything spill out, from the locked door to Felicia's mocking justifications. He listened in stunned silence, then assured me he'd take immediate action, insisting Felicia had finally gone too far. Dad's always been patient with her, hoping she'd mature, but that patience evaporated the moment she endangered his grandson. A few hours later, Greg texted me, asking if Robbie was all right and whether I needed anything. He confessed he'd found the thermostat switch in the basement turned off and an electric heater cord ripped out. Greg said he was seeing a darker side of Felicia he'd overlooked for years, and he felt horrified. The next day, Dad drove to Felicia's place, demanding an explanation for her behavior, and he didn't mince words. Felicia doubled down, calling me a freeloader and accusing Dad of always taking my side, the golden child. According to Dad, she didn't show a shred of remorse for jeopardizing Robbie's safety. She insisted I was overdramatic. That conversation ended with Dad informing her that he was revising his estate plans immediately, cutting her out of the trust. She erupted, accusing him of emotional blackmail, but Dad walked out, leaving her screaming after him in a rage. When Dad called me later, his voice trembled with anger, but he sounded resolute, determined to protect Robbie and me. He said if Felicia wanted to sabotage our family, then she could do it without a penny from him. I didn't protest because I cared deeply about Robbie's safety, making sure Felicia suffered consequences. I never intended to forgive her, and I wanted a form of justice that hurt her long term. Knowing Dad had cut her off financially was a relief, but I still felt she deserved more consequences for endangering Robbie. So I spoke with Greg, who was struggling to process Felicia's malice, especially toward an innocent child. He told me Felicia had never been particularly warm, but he never imagined she could stoop to this level. Greg admitted that he worried about their own daughter, Lily, being influenced by Felicia's spiteful behavior, so he took steps. He decided Felicia would have limited access to Lily, insisting any visits be supervised because he no longer trusted her judgment. When Felicia realized Greg was siding with me and Dad, she lost it, accusing him of betrayal and threatening divorce. Greg stood firm, saying she had crossed a line and he would protect Lily. I wanted to nail Felicia in a way she'd feel for years, and that's when I remembered her shaky finances. She relied heavily on Dad's trust fund, especially to maintain the lifestyle she flaunted in front of others. Without that money, she'd be forced to downsize, which she hated, given her obsession with appearances. But I had another idea. Felicia had borrowed a significant sum from Dad for a small business venture, a boutique shop. Dad never charged interest because she was family, but the loan agreement was legally documented, and it remained unpaid. I encouraged Dad to call in that loan, or else take her to court for breach of contract. At first, he hesitated, not wanting a legal battle, but I reminded him how far Felicia went to hurt Robbie. Dad's lawyer sent her a strict demand letter with 30 days to pay up immediately or face litigation. When Felicia received that letter, she panicked, calling me in tears, begging me to tell Dad she'd repay him eventually. I told her I was finished, that she brought this on herself when she locked Robbie in that basement. She tried to twist her motives, saying she never meant harm, but I hung up before she finished her sob story. Over the following days, she spammed me with messages, alternating between apologies and accusations, demanding I fix everything. I blocked her, told Dad what she was doing, and he said he'd handle it through the lawyer. Greg, on his part, confirmed he'd back Dad's claim if it went to court, refusing to cover Felicia's debt. He even contacted me to say Felicia was temporarily staying with a friend because he couldn't tolerate her rants anymore. I let Felicia endure the chaos she'd unleashed and made it known there'd be no forgiveness. With the legal pressure mounting, Felicia's business began to crumble as she scrambled to find funds. Her so-called friends distanced themselves once they realized she was no longer backed by Dad's money. Rumors spread about how she'd endangered her nephew, and people started avoiding her shop out of disgust. Meanwhile, Robbie recovered, though he still had nightmares about being locked in that cold basement. I reassured him that Felicia wouldn't have the chance to hurt him again, and I kept that promise. Dad, for his part, visited Robbie often, showering him with affection and reminding him he was safe now. Felicia's meltdown escalated. She left threatening voicemails on Dad's phone, saying she'd ruin us all if he didn't drop the lawsuit. Instead of backing down, Dad forwarded everything to his lawyer, strengthening the case for malicious intent. Greg took Lily to stay with his parents, denying Felicia access to daughter. Despite the turmoil, I refused to let Felicia's antics consume every part of my life, so I focused on Robbie's well-being. My son was shaken, but therapy sessions helped him process the betrayal and fear he'd experienced. Though I still burned with anger, I made sure Robbie saw me as a stable presence, someone who wouldn't let Felicia's cruelty define us. In the meantime, Dad's lawyer pushed forward with the demand for repayment, refusing any of Felicia's attempts to negotiate a lesser amount. She had promised she could repay eventually, but Dad had lost all faith in her intentions. Rumors circulated that she might try to file for bankruptcy just to avoid paying, but the documents Dad's lawyer had were airtight. There would be no easy escape for her. Greg, disillusioned, reached out occasionally, apologizing again on behalf of his daughter's mother. I never wavered in my stance. One afternoon, I got a call from Greg, who sounded drained. He'd been juggling work, Lily's school schedule, and the emotional fallout of Felicia's actions. He told me Felicia was still lashing out, blaming everyone but herself. She insisted Dad had set her up to fail, that I was orchestrating a massive smear campaign. Greg admitted that for a while he had tried to see if their marriage could be salvaged, but Felicia's raging denial made it impossible. She refused therapy, refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, and continued ranting about her so-called victimhood. At that point, Greg said he was preparing to file separation papers. He wanted Lily to grow up in a stable environment away from Felicia's destructive behavior. Hearing this, I felt a grim satisfaction. Actions have consequences, and Felicia had turned her entire world upside down by targeting my innocent child. Dad, who rarely lost his composure, was furious enough to testify against Felicia if it came to that. He'd discovered additional evidence of her misusing prior allowances, funneling money into personal luxuries under the guise of business expenses. I can't say I was shocked. My sister's obsession with appearances always led her to overspend, chasing a lifestyle she couldn't genuinely afford. Now that the trust fund was rescinded and the loan had been called in, she was left scrambling, with no one willing to lend her any support. The last time I spoke to Dad about it, he said Felicia had shown up at his door, screaming threats and insults. He turned her away without hesitation, telling her she was responsible for her own downfall. Although part of me felt the faintest twinge of pity, I remembered Robbie's terrified face and steeled my heart against mercy. Meanwhile, Robbie's therapist encouraged me to talk openly about what happened to assure him he hadn't done anything wrong. We discussed boundaries and how some people, even relatives, can be dangerous if they act out of jealousy or malice. Robbie seemed to understand, but every so often, he'd ask why Felicia hated us so much. My only answer was that sometimes people get lost in their anger and can't see beyond it. That's exactly how I saw Felicia. A woman so blinded by envy that she was willing to lock a sick child in a freezing basement just to feel superior. My father's legal strategy moved forward, unstoppable. The hearing date loomed, and Felicia, lacking funds for a decent attorney, struggled with a bargain basement legal aide who could barely help her. It was a train wreck of her own making, and I watched from a safe distance. The day of the civil hearing, Felicia showed up looking disheveled, not the polished perfectionist I once knew. Dad arrived with his lawyer, who presented detailed records of the unpaid loan and Felicia's explicit responsibility to repay it. Greg submitted a statement confirming her erratic behavior, which further damaged her credibility. I didn't attend in person, but Dad kept me informed. In the end, the judge granted a decision against Felicia, ordering her to repay the entire amount plus legal fees. She had no avenue to fight back effectively. Outside the courtroom, she reportedly exploded at Dad, calling him heartless, blaming me again for orchestrating everything. Dad told her that if she wanted to see heartless, she should think about how she had endangered Robbie's life. From what I heard, Felicia left in tears, but not a single shred of remorse crossed her lips. All the while, Greg stayed resolute in his decision to keep Lily with him. Felicia was furious, but even her lawyer couldn't argue that Greg was doing anything wrong by providing a safe environment for their daughter. After all, Felicia's track record was now marred by emotional instability and potential child endangerment. When she tried to get Lily back, Greg insisted on a supervised visitation schedule, something Felicia viewed as a personal attack. Yet, the court sided with Greg, acknowledging that Lily's well-being was paramount. To my knowledge, Felicia found a dingy apartment after a friend kicked her out for missing rent. She moved from place to place, job to job, her once lavish life reduced to desperate measures. I heard from distant acquaintances that she'd started blaming the entire family for her misery, but no one wanted to listen anymore. In my eyes, everything was unraveling for Felicia exactly as she deserved. She had inflicted fear and harm on my son, and I wasn't about to show her the mercy she never showed us. Dad severed all financial ties, ensuring she couldn't manipulate him for money ever again. Greg kept Lily far away, determined to prevent Felicia's toxic bitterness from poisoning their daughter's mind. The rest of the extended family, upon learning the truth, quietly distanced themselves. Occasionally, an aunt or cousin would ask me if I felt bad for her. Each time, I'd think about Robbie's trembling body, locked away with no warmth. That memory alone was enough to remind me, some lines shouldn't be crossed, and once they are, there's no forgiveness waiting on the other side. Felicia chose her path, and I was simply making sure she faced every consequence of that choice. I remember the first time Robbie smiled after the ordeal, genuinely smiled, and told me he wasn't scared anymore. That was the moment I realized my focus had to be on our future, not just my anger. But that didn't mean I would ever forget or pardon Felicia. I vowed never to let her near my son again. If she wanted to destroy her life through selfish choices, I wouldn't stand in her way. In fact, I made certain to speak to every family member, detailing exactly what happened, providing proof of her malicious intent. She was left with no one to champion her cause. If she wanted a redemption arc, it wouldn't come from me. I wasn't out for her apology. I was out to protect Robbie and see that she felt the repercussions. Turning the other cheek would have signaled weakness, and I refused to be weak. Occasionally, Greg and I talk about what lies ahead. He's not sure if their marriage can or should survive. He's in the process of filing divorce papers, intending to formalize custody arrangements for Lily. I don't blame him. In his shoes, I'd do the same. Our father remains firm that Felicia is no longer part of his estate planning, and he's considering leaving most of his assets in a trust for Robbie and Lily. That's the extent of his compassion. He still cares for his granddaughter's future, but not for Felicia's. As for me, I've moved on emotionally in many ways, though the scars of betrayal linger. Each day, I wake up grateful that Robbie is healthy and safe, that Dad stands by me, and that Felicia's hold on our family has been severed. My life is calmer without her venomous influence. I have no regrets. When people on the outside hear about what happened, some are appalled I didn't try harder to reconcile. My response is simple. I can't reconcile with someone who endangered my son. She locked him away like he was a nuisance, all for her petty need to feel superior. That's not a misunderstanding or a slight quarrel. It's unforgivable. She orchestrated her downfall the moment she turned off that thermostat. Letting her back into our lives would only invite further chaos, and I refuse to let Robbie be exposed to her cruelty again. I realize some might say holding on to revenge is toxic, but I disagree. This isn't me obsessing over payback. It's me ensuring she answers for her actions and remains barred from harming my child in the future. If that's vengeance, so be it. I wear that label without shame. By the time Felicia's court-ordered repayment schedule kicked in, she was already drowning in debt. Dad made it clear he didn't want to see her unless it pertained to legal matters. Greg had full custody of Lily, allowing supervised visits only when Felicia could prove she was stable. She tried once to approach me in public, maybe hoping a scene would make me relent, but I ignored her completely. My father, upon hearing about it, served her another warning through his attorney. She had no place in our lives anymore, no privilege of dragging out her complaints. That forced Felicia into even tighter isolation. While I can't celebrate another person's misery outright, I won't pretend to grieve for her self-inflicted downfall. Each choice she made dug her deeper into this pit. All I did was refuse to throw her a rope. Even now, I keep all communication about Felicia to a minimum, speaking only to confirm court dates or check that Robbie is safe from any contact attempts. Some might consider it cruel, but cruelty was locking a vulnerable child in a cold basement. Cruelty was refusing to apologize or showing even a hint of remorse. I merely followed through, ensuring her aggression had tangible consequences. Dad says he sometimes wonders if he should have been stricter with her growing up. Perhaps, but at this point, it doesn't matter. She's an adult who made a sadistic choice. That decision cost her a family, a stable marriage, and financial security. Am I sorry for that outcome? Not in the slightest. My only regret is that Robbie had to experience such terror. At least now he knows I'll never let anyone get away with hurting him. In the end, Felicia stands as a grim reminder that envy and resentment can corrode a person's entire existence. She threw away everything over a delusional belief that I was somehow stealing Dad's affection and resources. Her twisted sense of entitlement led her to commit a vile act against an innocent child. My father disowned her in every meaningful sense. Greg left her for the sake of their daughter, and our extended relatives keep their distance, repulsed by her cruelty. Some tragedies are self-made, and I won't let her rewrite this story into one of victimhood. She is the villain of her own life. As for me and Robbie, we've moved on to a place of relative peace, surrounded by those who genuinely care. That's the only ending I want. A life free from Felicia's poisonous spite, with no forgiveness granted and no regrets about our firm stand. Dad's decision to remove Felicia from his trust was a turning point, but the final blow was really Greg refusing her access to their child. That was the moment she realized nobody stood in her corner anymore. Yet, even in the face of that isolation, she never offered genuine remorse, never acknowledged the pain she inflicted on Robbie. If she had shown any true regret, maybe Dad might have softened, or Greg might have given their marriage one last chance. But the door to grace was sealed shut by her own refusal to accept responsibility. I don't expect Felicia to change, nor do I waste time hoping she'll find some epiphany. The only thing that matters is that Robbie is safe, our father's legacy is protected, and Felicia is barred from ever harming us again. That's how it should be. Revenge might not erase the memories, but it sure sets boundaries no one dares to cross. I want to reiterate, I don't forgive her, and I never will. Some things can't be undone by apologies, even if she bothered to give one. Watching her lose her privileges, her social standing, and her marriage was the only justice I could accept after seeing Robbie's lips turn blue from cold. No sincere contrition ever came, and I wouldn't have believed it anyway. If that labels me petty, I embrace it wholeheartedly. My son is my priority. Ensuring the person who harmed him suffers real consequences is simply part of protecting him. For all those who think I'm being vindictive, I have one response. Try locking your child in a freezing basement, then see how merciful you feel. My father and Greg felt the same way. Felicia is out of our lives permanently. I'm fine with that, so is Robbie. And that, I believe, is the best revenge imaginable. My parents haven't been in the same room since their brutal divorce 5 years ago. It feels bizarre to even type that out, because for most of my life, they were the model couple that everyone envied. They had the perfect house, hosted legendary block parties, and showered me with everything I ever needed. Then Dad confessed he'd been seeing someone else for months. Mom packed her bags that same night, and every illusion of normalcy we had was torn to shreds. Ever since, they've refused to attend any event together. Birthdays, graduations, even my college orientation. They made me choose. I hated being caught in their crossfire. When I graduated college, I had 2 separate parties to appease their standoff. Dad demanded I invite only him to the ceremony and celebrate with Mom afterwards, but she'd given more than her fair share to get me through school. I tried to compromise by letting them both attend, but Dad made a scene, storming out when he spotted Mom in the auditorium. That day, I realized I was the one who had to bend over backward just to keep them from tearing each other to pieces. It was maddening, but I endured. After I met Evan, my fiancé, things got more complicated. Dad loathed the idea of me settling down so young, insisting I was too naive to see that relationships fail. In his eyes, marriage was doomed from the start. Mom, on the other hand, was overly supportive. She acted like Evan was the son she never had. That meant her presence became a major sticking point for Dad. He insisted on controlling the guest list. If I so much as mentioned Mom's name, he'd threaten not to come. Evan tried to mediate, but Dad shut him down, calling him an outsider. I tried to keep the peace. I really did. But the wedding was supposed to be our day, not Dad's chance to rewrite history or Mom's chance to prove she'd moved on. The more I tried to include them both, the more impossible it became. Then came the final straw. Dad told me he'd only pay for the venue if I excluded Mom from the ceremony. He offered to rent a gorgeous hall that Evan and I couldn't afford on our own, all under one condition: Mom stays away. That's when I realized just how very manipulative he had become. He claimed it was for my benefit, so I wouldn't have to deal with tension on my wedding day. But tension was all I'd known for years. Evan and I had scraped and saved, hoping to finance a modest venue ourselves, but Dad's money was tempting. Part of me wanted to accept just to relieve us of some financial strain. However, each time I thought about how Mom had supported me when Dad walked out, I knew I couldn't betray her. She deserved to see me walk down the aisle. She deserved to witness a ceremony she helped make possible, so I told Dad no. He exploded, accused me of being ungrateful, said I was letting Mom manipulate me. He said I was choosing her side and that I'd regret it. According to him, if I wanted him at all, I had to do it his way. But I refused. Evan supported my decision fully. We weren't going to let anyone, not even my father, dictate how our wedding unfolded. I expected Dad to withdraw financially, but I didn't expect his next move. He reached out to every relative he could, spinning lies about how I was excluding him completely. Suddenly, I had a barrage of texts from aunts, uncles, and cousins, all demanding to know why I was banning Dad. My phone blew up daily. Some messages were hurtful, calling me a disloyal daughter. Others were guilt trips, insisting I hear him out. I tried explaining, but Dad had spun such a convincing tale. He was the poor father cast aside. Mom was the villain, and I was her brainwashed puppet. It infuriated me, but I tried to remain completely calm. I wanted to set the record straight without stooping to his level. Unfortunately, the damage had already been done. Evan suggested we cut Dad off entirely, but I wasn't ready. Despite everything, he's still my father. I clung to the hope he'd come to his senses. Mom offered to bow out, but I refused to let her sacrifice any more. She deserved a seat at my weddings. My best friend advised me to hire security to handle Dad if he tried to crash. I laughed it off initially, but I was growing anxious. Dad's meltdown was so dramatic that I had nightmares about him barging in, dragging Mom out by force. I realized I needed a very solid plan. At first, I tried reasoning with him, hoping to find a compromise. He slammed the door in my face, literally and figuratively. When I drove to his house, he refused to let me inside, yelling through the door that he had nothing to say if I kept letting Mom poison me. I stood there, fists shaking, before giving up. That's when my anger crystallized. If he wanted a war, I'd give him one. I was done walking on eggshells. I was done being the meek daughter who only wanted harmony. I decided he had to face very indeed serious consequences. I had a plan. Let him think I caved. I'd pretend to disinvite Mom, pretend to yield to his demands, and lull him into a false sense of victory. Meanwhile, I'd coordinate with Mom behind the scenes, ensuring she was prepared for the actual event. Evan was initially skeptical, but came around once he realized how determined I was. The hardest part was convincing Mom to play along. She was hurt at first, but when I explained I was tired of Dad's manipulations, she agreed. We plotted every detail, right down to the day of itinerary and who would escort her. I reached out to Dad, feigning guilt. I apologized for being selfish, told him I couldn't imagine my wedding day without him. He swallowed it up. Soon, he was bragging about how he'd known I'd see reason. He even offered to pay for more than the venue, flowers, catering, anything I wanted, as long as Mom stayed away. I pretended relief, which only fueled his arrogance. Meanwhile, Evan and I quietly found a smaller, affordable venue for our real ceremony. We booked it under my friend's name to keep Dad from discovering the ruse. He had no clue what was coming. Dad started planning his own guest list. He insisted on inviting business associates and distant relatives I barely knew. I let him, smiling and nodding as he took control. He reveled in checking off tasks, booking a fancy venue, sending out invitations stamped with his name. Meanwhile, the real invitations were emailed quietly to those I trusted. The official story was that the wedding date had changed, so I asked people to keep it confidential due to family drama. Those loyal to Dad received the old date and location. I was splitting my guests in a very high-stakes, risky gamble. My plan was to let Dad host his own sham wedding while the real one took place elsewhere. It sounds absurd, I know, but it was the only way to ensure he didn't sabotage our actual ceremony. Some people called me petty, others hailed it as genius when I confided in them. Mom was worried about potential fallout, but I reminded her Dad had never once considered the fallout of his manipulations. If he wanted to be top dog, let him preside over an empty hall while the rest of us celebrated at the real venue. It felt really fitting. The days leading up to the double wedding were hectic. Dad bragged online about his event, posting updates about the decor and the fancy dinner he'd ordered. He even posted a countdown clock for everyone to see. Meanwhile, Evan and I finished last-minute details for the real ceremony, finalizing vows, confirming the caterer, ensuring our guest list stayed discreet. A few relatives, those stuck in the middle, didn't know which invitation to trust. I gently clarified in private messages, urging them to join us at the smaller venue if they truly supported our marriage. Surprisingly, most of them chose our side wholeheartedly. Finally, the morning of Dad's wedding extravaganza arrived. He texted me, reminding me to be punctual. I played my part, assuring him I'd be there right on time. In reality, I was slipping into my dress at the real venue, surrounded by people who loved me. Mom was in tears, helping me with my hair while my bridesmaids fussed over last-minute details. Evan's parents were already seated, beaming with pride. My heart raced, but not from fear. I was determined to get married on my terms with both parents invited, even if Dad had effectively disqualified himself by ultimate betrayal. The ceremony began. My mother walked me down the aisle, tears shining in her eyes. Evan stood at the altar, looking more handsome than I'd ever seen him. It was a small gathering, but every face radiated genuine love. We recited our vows, exchanged rings, and sealed our commitment with a kiss. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and applause erupted. My eyes stung with emotion as I realized this was how it was always meant to be: intimate, full of compassion, and free from toxic demands. As we signed the marriage license, I couldn't stop trembling with relief. During the reception, I got a flurry of frantic texts. Relatives were at the big venue, wondering where I was. Some demanded refunds for hotel bookings. Others were furious they'd shown up to an empty hall. Dad was nowhere to be found. He probably realized what was happening when the staff informed him there was no bride, no groom, just a booked room with fancy table settings and no guest to enjoy them. The phone rang incessantly, but I silenced it. It was my wedding day. I refused to let him poison this moment. I'd deal personally with him later. Sure enough, Dad eventually tracked me down. While Evan and I danced with friends, the door to the reception hall burst open. Dad stood there, red-faced, eyes wild with rage. My cousin tried to block him, but he shoved her aside. In front of everyone, he demanded an explanation, screaming that I'd humiliated him. People gasped, some pulling out their phones to record. I stood my ground. My voice shook, but I refused to be scared. I told him he'd humiliated himself by trying to bully me into excluding Mom. This was the consequence he'd earned, simply not a mistake. He looked like he wanted to lash out, but security intervened, pushing him back. I heard him yelling that I was a completely ungrateful brat, that he'd spent so much money on a venue I never used. I reminded him no one forced him to act like a dictator. He had a choice to be a supportive father, and he chose manipulation. Mom stayed in the background, not needing to say a word. Her mere presence was enough. My father glared at her with pure hatred. Then he turned and stormed out, cursing under his breath. We let him go. Afterward, some guests asked if I regretted it. Truthfully, not ever at all. I had no remorse about standing up to him, about ensuring Mom could see me marry the man I love. Dad tried to call me later that evening, leaving a voicemail full of insults. He accused me of being brainwashed, said he'd cut me off financially forever. I laughed. My father's money was never worth my dignity. Mom had already given me enough for a simple wedding, but I'd chosen a smaller ceremony for reasons beyond cost. This was about autonomy, about refusing to be his pawn anymore. Evan and I left for a short honeymoon, and during that time, Dad tried various tactics to win back sympathy. He posted on social media that I'd kidnapped our guests and scammed him out of money. He even threatened legal action, though that went nowhere. Most people saw through his ranting. Mom and I stayed quiet, letting him self-destruct. I received texts from relatives who had attended his fake wedding, some absolutely furious, some apologetic. One aunt admitted she wished she'd chosen me instead of Dad, but she'd believed his lies. Their regret only confirmed I'd made the right choice. I returned from the honeymoon refreshed, but also resolute. Dad and I were done. My mother had endured enough over the years, and I'd had my fill of his manipulations. If he wanted to reconcile, he'd have to show actual remorse, not crocodile tears. So far, he hadn't. Instead, he sent me texts insisting I pay him back for the venue he'd rented. I ignored them. He threatened to sue, but I knew he had no legal grounds. He made that choice without a signed contract from me, so he'd basically thrown away money to fulfill his own personal vendetta. Despite Dad's meltdown, our marriage was incredibly happy. Evan and I moved into our new apartment and focused on building a life together. Mom visited often, bringing homemade meals or helping us pick out furniture. She never once badmouthed Dad in front of me, which I appreciated. I knew she had her own wounds, but she let me handle things in my own way. Occasionally, Dad would leave another voicemail, dripping with resentment, or send me a long-winded email about how I'd ruined his reputation. I saved them in a folder labeled Evidence, just in case. I felt surprisingly free. In time, Dad's drama became background noise. Evan and I started discussing the future, careers, maybe kids down the road. I felt a sense of peace, knowing I'd taken a stand. The heartbreak of my parents' divorce had weighed on me for years, but now I saw it clearly. Dad had chosen bitterness, while Mom had chosen healing. I couldn't fix that for him. He could stew in his resentment, but I wouldn't let him use me as a tool anymore. At family gatherings, people whispered about our rift. I didn't mind. In fact, I was relieved to be completely free. Years later, I still can't believe I pulled off that wedding switch. Sometimes, Evan and I laugh about it, imagining Dad pacing that fancy hall, searching for guests who never arrived. We wonder if he truly expected me to cut Mom out of my big day. I guess he underestimated just how far I'd go to protect my happiness. Some might see it as extreme, but for me, it was liberation. I had spent too long tiptoeing around his emotional landmines. By orchestrating that ruse, I reclaimed my autonomy and gave him a taste of his own deeply, entirely cruel tactics. People sometimes ask if I ever forgave him. I did not. He betrayed me over and over, making it clear I was just a bargaining chip in his feud with Mom. Forgiveness isn't always deserved. Sometimes you can only protect yourself from further harm. I choose to move on without his toxicity, which is far more liberating than pretending everything is fine. Whenever he tries to contact me now, I don't pick up. I've let him know I'm open to real reconciliation, but not to manipulations or forced apologies. Until he gets that, I honestly see no reason to forgive. I know some people believe in unconditional forgiveness. They say holding on to anger harms you more than the one who wronged you. Maybe there's truth in that, but I don't feel harmed by my anger. I feel galvanized. I refuse to enable Dad by pretending what he did was okay. He used to see me as a completely helpless child, easy to control. Now he knows I can fight back. It's not about vengeance for me, It's about self-respect. And if that means never letting him weasel back into my life without absolutely genuine change, I'm at peace with that choice. Sometimes I recall the countless family therapy sessions Mom and I tried to arrange, the mediation attempts Dad ignored. He had chance after chance to treat me like a human being instead of a trophy he could withhold at will. Even his own siblings told him he was out of line, but he wouldn't listen. So when people ask if I regret truly humiliating him, I point out that he set himself up for it. The pain he felt on my wedding day was the direct result of his actions. Actions have consequences, and mine was the sweetest revenge possible. Today, I have a great relationship with my mother, a wonderful marriage, and friends who respect me for standing my ground. Dad remains a cautionary tale, a man so consumed by pride that he lost sight of what truly mattered. Sometimes, I wonder if he'll ever change, if he'll wake up one day regretting how he treated us. But that's his path to walk. I don't lose sleep over it. My life is moving forward. I share this story because it might help others trapped in similar manipulations. You can stand up for yourself without regret, and it can feel incredible. So, that's it. That's how I turned my father's ultimatum into his own humiliation, and how I finally broke free from years of emotional blackmail. If you're reading this and feeling torn between two warring parents, know that you are not their battleground. You have a right to draw lines, to protect your joy, and to hold people accountable for their behavior. My dad learned that the hard way, and I don't apologize for it. I found my spine, planned my revenge, and followed through. I didn't forgive. I didn't forget. And I've never been happier. That's the real victory. 1 year ago, I was engaged to a woman I believed was the love of my life. Our relationship felt like the perfect love story, especially because she got along so well with my family. I had no clue what betrayal might lurk behind the scenes. My brother, who's just a year younger than me, had always been a bit competitive. He had a history of overshadowing me. From grade school awards to attention at family gatherings, I used to shrug it off as sibling rivalry. That changed drastically 2 months before our wedding, when I found them together in my bed. I still remember how surreal it felt when I opened the door. I'd come home early from a cake tasting appointment that got rescheduled. Instead of calling ahead, I thought I'd surprise my fiancée with a bouquet of flowers. I walked in quietly, eager to see her delighted face. Then I heard hushed voices and what sounded like stifled laughter. When I opened the bedroom door, my heart dropped. There, tangled in bedsheets I had chosen, were my brother and my fiancée. I must have looked like an apparition standing by the doorway, holding flowers meant to celebrate our upcoming union. I remember my fiancée's eyes widening, her mouth dropping open without any words. My brother scrambled to cover himself. Neither one looked at me with remorse. It was shock and fear, like children caught with their hands in the cookie jar. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply turned around, walked out, and slammed the door behind me. That might have been more terrifying to them than any scream. Something in me shut down, like a switch flipping. All those feelings, love, trust, hope, vanished in an instant. The wedding was off, and I told them both in a brief text. My parents found out almost immediately. They refused to believe it at first, but a single look at my face told them everything. My mother cried, ranting about how shameful it was to have this scandal in our family. My father tried to talk to my brother, but apparently, he was too embarrassed to come home. My ex-fiancée tried calling me, sending me messages, and even showed up at my workplace. I blocked her. I informed my boss about the situation so no one would let her in. I had no space for discussion. Their betrayal was the final straw. 2 weeks after the breakup, I learned she was pregnant. My mother wept with relief, thinking the baby was mine, and demanded I work things out. But I knew better. I confronted my ex-fiancée, and she confessed that the child was my brother's. My parents turned on my brother immediately, furious that he'd sabotaged our upcoming marriage. But he convinced them that he was in love and that they hadn't planned for this to happen. He also claimed he wanted to marry her out of responsibility. That only fueled my mother's heartbreak further, as she had to watch her family split. Despite the turmoil, my ex and brother actually went through with their own wedding. It was small, quick, and I wasn't invited. My parents were torn, but they attended because they felt obligated. They later told me it was one of the most awkward ceremonies they'd ever witnessed. My father didn't even give a toast. I was numb by then, focusing on my job and seeking therapy. I told myself I needed to heal, not dwell on revenge or bitterness, but that was easier said than done. The wedding photos they posted online reopened wounds I hadn't even realized were still raw. I distanced myself from the entire family. It hurt, but it was the only way I could think clearly. Therapy helped me process the betrayal, and I tried to rebuild my social circle. I poured myself into work and started hanging out with coworkers, some of whom eventually became close friends. Occasionally, my parents called to update me on my brother and his new wife. I didn't want to hear it, but they insisted, saying I was still part of the family. I told them that family doesn't do what he did, and I ended the calls as soon as possible. 7 months after their wedding, my brother vanished. He left a note saying he needed space and took off. No one knew if it was a midlife crisis, a job opportunity somewhere else, or simply a cowardly escape. His wife was heavily pregnant by then. My mother told me, sobbing, that they had no idea where he went. She tried calling me repeatedly, and when I finally picked up, she begged me to talk to my sister-in-law. She thought I could somehow convince him to come back, or at least offer some emotional support to the woman he left behind. I hung up. I was incredulous at how my parents could even think I owed this woman anything. She was the one who destroyed my trust and slept with my brother in my own bed. If anything, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction knowing my brother had turned out to be just as unfaithful to her as he'd been disloyal to me. She had chosen him over me, and now she had to deal with the consequences of that choice. My parents thought I was cruel, but I viewed it as justice. I had nothing to offer them anymore. 3 months later, she gave birth to a baby girl. My brother was still nowhere to be found. My father tried everything, calling old friends, searching records, even hiring a private investigator. But no one could locate him. In the meantime, my parents expected me to step in, as if I were some replacement. I refused, ever reminding them that their loyalty had wavered when I needed them most. They argued I was punishing an innocent child for her parents' mistakes. I retorted that I'd paid enough for someone else's sins. This wasn't my responsibility, and I wouldn't let them guilt-trip me. My mother showed up unannounced at my apartment. She brought my sister-in-law and the baby, hoping I'd melt at the sight of my niece. I was polite enough not to slam the door, but I made it clear they couldn't stay. My mother demanded I at least hold the baby. The tension was thick, and my sister-in-law looked miserable. She apologized in a trembling voice, but I saw no remorse in her eyes, only desperation. She asked me to help her financially until my brother was found or until she could manage on her own. I refused. It wasn't my problem. When they left, I felt surprisingly empowered. For months, I'd been dealing with guilt because everyone implied I was cold-hearted. Yet the reality was that they'd stomped on my heart. Now they wanted me to pick up the pieces of a situation I never asked for. I decided it was time to protect myself fully. I blocked my parents' phone numbers for a while, ignoring their tearful voicemails. I ignored my sister-in-law's attempts to reach out through social media. I even moved to a new apartment without telling anyone. It felt extreme, but I couldn't handle their constant demands anymore. As time passed, I heard bits and pieces about my sister-in-law from relatives. She'd lost her job, was behind on rent, and had to rely on handouts from charities. My parents offered her spare rooms, but apparently she refused because of pride or tension. They still tried to contact me, pushing the narrative that I should help. I didn't budge. The more they pressed, the more convinced I became that this wasn't my cross to bear. In therapy, I finally stopped questioning whether I was a bad person. I realized I had a right to my boundaries and my anger. Then came an unexpected phone call from my aunt, someone who rarely meddled. She informed me that my sister-in-law had started hanging out with a sketchy crowd. There were rumors of substance abuse, and my aunt worried about the baby. She asked if I could step in to protect the child. I was torn. On one hand, I had no legal authority or moral obligation. On the other, there was an innocent baby in harm's way. My aunt suggested I report her to child services if I suspected neglect. I wrestled with the idea, but decided to wait for proof. Eventually, I heard from a mutual friend that my sister-in-law was arrested for petty theft. She apparently stole diapers and baby formula from a store. My parents were frantic, and they paid her bail. That's when a plan began to form in my mind. I started digging around, finding out exactly how dire her financial situation was. I discovered she had multiple credit card debts, medical bills, and now a criminal charge. She was buried. And that's when I saw my opening for revenge. I'd spent too long nursing my own wounds. It was time to make a decisive move. I looked into legal avenues. I was curious if there was any way to ensure her life became more complicated. Since she'd already broken the law, I contemplated giving an anonymous tip to the authorities about her unstable environment. But I didn't want the baby to suffer unnecessarily, so I had to be careful. Instead, I contacted her landlord, pretending to be a potential employer, verifying her address. That's how I discovered she was months behind on rent. I left a note with management, hinting at her illegal activities and cautioning them about potential property damage. It was but effective. I also spread subtle rumors among former co-workers of hers, implying she was engaged in questionable side gigs. Nothing overtly defamatory, just enough to sow doubt. Word would likely get around to any future employer. I found out she was applying for jobs, so I made anonymous calls to prospective companies, warning them about her recent theft charge. I heard through the grapevine that she was getting rejection after rejection. Meanwhile, she tried to contact my parents for more help, but they were tapped out. She was drowning in her own mess, and I was giving her a gentle push further. Some people might think I was going too far, but every time I questioned myself, I remembered how she and my brother had crushed me. I wasn't putting the baby in danger. I was just ensuring she faced the consequences of her actions. If she'd shown genuine remorse, I might have softened, but everything she did screamed entitlement, from expecting me to finance her life to parading around as though I'd forgive or forget. I wasn't going to let that pass. This was the first time in my life I'd felt truly in control, and I absolutely savored every moment. In the middle of this, my parents tried one final plea. They reached out to my therapist, begging for a family session. My therapist asked if I'd be willing to hear them out. Out of curiosity, I agreed. During the session, they cried, apologized for not supporting me, and insisted they loved me. But then came the same old plea, help your brother's wife for the baby's sake. I reminded them that this was the same woman who cheated with my brother. The same brother who'd betrayed me. I told them I didn't owe them or her a single thing. They called me heartless. My father said I was punishing an innocent child. My mother sobbed that families should stick together. I pointed out that they hadn't stuck by me when I found them in my bed. They hadn't insisted my brother step aside so I could salvage my life. They had essentially forced me to deal with the fallout alone. Now they wanted me to save the day because my brother was gone. That session ended in a shouting match. My therapist told me later that my anger was valid, and I had every right to maintain my stance. A few weeks later, I learned my sister-in-law got evicted. She moved in with a friend who wasn't any better off. I heard from extended family that she started selling her belongings to pay for basic necessities. Meanwhile, I kept making those discreet calls wherever she applied for jobs. I wasn't lying, just highlighting her criminal record and irresponsible behavior. If a company decided she was too risky, that was their choice. I felt no guilt. She'd shown me none when she ruined my life, so I felt none now. That might make me absolutely awful, but I was past caring. Over time, the baby ended up with my parents more often than not. They babysat while my sister-in-law scrambled for money or vanished with questionable friends. My mother kept leaving voicemails, begging me to consider adopting my niece. She claimed they were too old to raise a child. I felt sorry for the baby, but I wasn't about to become a parent under these circumstances. Eventually, I found out child services had been alerted by a neighbor. My sister-in-law was investigated. She lashed out at me, accusing me of tipping them off, but I hadn't. They found her neglectful anyway. Not long after, my parents took temporary custody of the baby. They pleaded with me again to step in. I said no. My sister-in-law spiraled further, missing court dates, failing drug tests, and eventually landing back in jail for violating probation. My father confronted me, blaming me for not offering her a lifeline. I told him it wasn't my job to rescue her from her own self-destruction. She had made her choice when she slept with my brother. That was the moment she lost any right to my compassion. He left, calling me unrecognizable, but I felt absolutely nothing else. I soon learned my brother had been spotted in another state, living with some new girlfriend. He was presumably unaware of the chaos he left behind. My parents tried to reach him, but he ignored their calls. Meanwhile, the baby was stuck in limbo, with my parents too old to provide long-term care, and my sister-in-law facing multiple legal issues. None of this changed my decision. I'd built a new life. I started dating again, carefully. I had a supportive network of friends. Whenever guilt crept in, I reminded myself, these were the consequences of their betrayal, not ever mine. Last week, I got a letter from a lawyer representing my parents. They were exploring legal guardianship options, and the document suggested I might be compelled to testify or even consider adoption. I contacted an attorney of my own who explained that while my parents could push for it, I couldn't be forced to adopt my niece. The best they could do was call me as a witness regarding the family situation. That was fine by me. I had nothing to hide. If anything, I was prepared to tell the court detail of how I'd been betrayed and cast aside. I refused to paint a picture. They want to claim family first? Let them hear how my family turned on me. Let them see the consequences of my brother's selfishness and my sister-in-law's betrayal. When the time comes, I'll testify honestly. I won't sugarcoat anything. If this ends with my niece in foster care, I'll feel bad for her, but that's not my responsibility. My father keeps calling, telling me I'm a monster for letting this happen. I told him they made me into who I am now. I'll never forgive what they did. This is their mess to fix. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had forgiven them. But then I recall that horrible image of my fiancé and brother in my bed. I remember the humiliation, the heartbreak, and how they all expected me to just bounce back. That memory fuels me whenever I doubt my choices. It keeps me resolute. I've had enough heartbreak for a lifetime, and none of them showed any concern for my well-being when it mattered. So yes, I'm letting them drown in the consequences. I'm no saint, but I'm not a doormat anymore. I have no intention of backing down. I suppose some will judge me for this stance, but I'd rather be judged than let them walk all over me again. My sister-in-law is the architect of her own misery. She made her bed, pun intended, when she slept with my brother. And he's just as guilty. If he ever comes crawling back, he'll find the door firmly shut. I'm done being the family punching bag. If I sound bitter, maybe I am. But bitterness is a small price to pay for protecting my future. If there's any lesson here, it's that betrayal has a cost, and I'm making them pay. To everyone who believes in quick forgiveness, I'm not your example. I believe some betrayals cut too deep, and the only closure is to let the betrayers face the music. I've been called vengeful, spiteful, and worse, but I sleep well at night, knowing I finally stood up for myself. My ex-fiancé and my brother took everything I held dear. Now I'm simply returning the favor by refusing to help them patch up the damage. Maybe one day I'll meet my niece under better circumstances. But for now, I'm severing every tie. This is ultimately how I choose to heal. So, that's my story, and I'm not looking for approval. I've been through hell, and I chose to respond in the only way that felt right. My brother vanished, my ex-fiancé ended up in ruins, and my parents reaped what they sowed by failing to protect me. If anyone wants a lesson, maybe it's this. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those who claim to love you. There's no rule that says you have to forgive. Sometimes, letting them drown in their own consequences is the greatest justice you can have. That's my truth, and I stand by it. I never thought I'd post a story like this, but I need an outside perspective. My sister, who's 2 years younger than me, always had a flair for drama. We grew up in a competitive household, though I never saw myself as her rival. She, on the other hand, seemed to thrive on one-upping me. Our parents tried to intervene, but the tension only grew. When I found out I was pregnant, I was nervous, but excited. My boyfriend and I hadn't planned it, but we were in a stable relationship, and we were ready to be parents. I hoped my sister would support me. I truly believed she'd put aside her issues and be happy for me. Sadly, I was wrong. Oui. I told her the news before we announced it to the rest of our family. She stared at me blankly for a moment, then burst into laughter. She said I was ruining my life. She insisted my boyfriend would leave me, that I'd end up alone, and that having a baby so young was a mistake. I was 26 with a decent job and a supportive partner, but she refused to acknowledge that. She made snide remarks whenever I mentioned my pregnancy. She told me I was going to blimp out and teased me about maternity clothes. I tried to ignore her, hoping she'd get over it. Unfortunately, she only grew more vicious as the months went by. Utterly stunned. By the time my baby shower rolled around, I had grown used to her sarcasm. I wanted a small gathering, just close friends and family. Everything was planned to be intimate. My sister showed up late, carrying a gift bag with a smug grin. She pulled me aside and whispered that she hoped the baby wasn't hideous like me. I swallowed my anger for the sake of my guests. Then she took center stage, telling everyone how she disapproved of my choices, criticizing everything from the theme to the food. My friends tried to intervene, but she kept going until I was on the brink of tears. She actually smirked when she saw me falling apart. I felt completely humiliated. I tried cutting her off after that fiasco. My parents begged me to let bygones be bygones, insisting she was just immature. My boyfriend urged me to focus on my health and ignore the drama. I blocked her on social media and refused to attend family gatherings if she was there. She called me petty and oversensitive. When my daughter was born, it was a painful but miraculous experience. We named her Mia, and from the moment she arrived, my entire world changed. I was exhausted but so in love. My sister texted me 1 week after I gave birth, demanding to see the baby and insisting she had a right as an aunt. I never responded. I stayed silent. Months passed in a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and sleepless nights. I was learning how to be a mother. My parents visited often, bringing groceries and helping with chores. My sister's absence felt like a relief, although part of me wished she'd just grow up. Then, out of nowhere, she announced her engagement on social media. She wrote a long post about how thrilled she was to be marrying her soulmate, a guy she'd been dating for 6 months. Suddenly, she bombarded Facebook and Instagram with pictures of Mia that she must have stolen from my parents' accounts. She captioned them with glowing tributes about being the best aunt ever. I was livid when I saw it. I fumed. I confronted her online, leaving a brief comment telling her to remove Mia's pictures. She ignored me. I messaged her privately and asked her politely first. She brushed me off, claiming it was her right as family. Then she blocked me. I wasn't even able to see the posts anymore, but friends kept sending me screenshots. She was using my baby's photos to garner likes and praise for her newfound aunt persona, all while refusing to speak to me directly. Meanwhile, she presented herself as a doting sister who supported me all along. People congratulated her on how caring she was, and she soaked it up. The gall of it all left me shaking with anger. I felt utterly disgusted. At this point, I was done playing nice. I had no intention of forgiving her. She had never apologized for humiliating me at my own baby shower. Now she was exploiting Mia for social media clout, oblivious to the boundaries I'd set. A friend who was still following my sister informed me that she was using Mia's pictures in posts about her upcoming wedding, almost like she wanted to frame herself as a nurturing family woman. I decided it was time to fight back in a way that she would never expect. I didn't want to stoop to her level, but I also refused to let her parade around as this angelic aunt. My revenge plan began forming. I schemed. First, I took all of Mia's pictures off my parents' social media and tightened their privacy settings. Then I documented every post my sister had made featuring Mia, just in case I needed proof. I reached out to her fiancé, who had always been polite to me, though we weren't close. I told him I needed to clarify something about the pictures she was posting. He seemed confused and asked me to elaborate. I explained that she was using my daughter's images without permission, painting a false narrative to gain sympathy and attention. He asked for screenshots, so I sent them. He apologized profusely on her behalf, promising to talk to her, but I wasn't done yet. Not even close. I decided to address her online persona directly. Since she'd blocked me, I used a friend's account to comment on her posts. I wrote calmly, pointing out that these pictures were posted without my consent. I explained Mia was not her prop to use for likes. I kept screenshots of everything I wrote and everything she deleted. She tried to paint me as the irrational one, claiming I was jealous of her engagement. Yet the more she lashed out, the more suspicious her fiancé became. He started questioning the stories she'd told him about our relationship. He reached out again, asking for more context. I let him know exactly how she had treated me since my pregnancy. Her lies unraveled. My sister panicked. She unblocked me and sent me a series of furious messages. She blamed me for turning her fiancé against her. She said I was ruining her life by refusing to let her have this moment of happiness. I told her that if she wanted happiness, she should have thought about how her actions might affect others. She threatened to sue me for defamation if I kept spreading lies. That's when I dropped the bomb. I had every humiliating text she'd ever sent, every screenshot from my baby shower meltdown, and every hateful comment she'd posted. I warned her that if she tried to push me legally, I'd release all of it publicly. She went silent, rightfully so. Her fiancé continued talking to me, trying to understand what was going on. He seemed genuinely mortified. He had no idea she'd bullied me or mocked my pregnancy. He asked if these were exaggerations, but I directed him to real evidence. Over the next week, rumors surfaced that their relationship was on the rocks. My parents begged me to lie or downplay the situation, but I refused. I told them I wouldn't actively ruin her life, but I wasn't going to protect her either. She had made her bed. Then, at a family dinner, she turned up with red eyes and puffy cheeks. She cornered me in the hallway, demanding that I repair her image. I laughed in her face. I reminded her that she'd done this to herself. She shrieked that she was my sister, and I had to fix it. I walked away without looking back. Later that evening, she tried to put on a show for my parents, sobbing about how sorry she was, but she never once apologized directly to me. I took Mia home and refused to listen. Over the following days, her fiancé moved out of their shared apartment. The wedding was postponed. My sister spiraled, lashing out on social media, claiming I was orchestrating a smear campaign. People started commenting on her posts, asking why she had been so cruel to me. Screenshots circulated. Her perfect aunt facade crumbled spectacularly. She deserved it. I won't pretend I didn't feel a grim sense of satisfaction. This woman had made my pregnancy a nightmare and then used my baby for attention. Seeing her forced to face consequences felt just. But I wasn't done. I found out she was telling people she'd be reconnecting with her niece any day now, insisting we'd work things out. So I made a public statement on my own social media, clarifying that I did not condone my sister's behavior and that Mia would not be part of her wedding photos, if the wedding ever happened. I kept it factual, attaching a few screenshots of her cruelty for anyone who doubted me. The post went viral among friends. People backed me. My sister called me in a rage, screaming that I was humiliating her. She demanded I delete the post immediately. I refused, telling her I'd take it down only if she apologized directly and stopped using Mia's pictures. She hung up, then texted me a half-hearted, "I'm sorry you feel that way" apology that wasn't even close to genuine. I told her I wouldn't accept anything less than a real acknowledgement of her wrongdoing. She never responded. Instead, she cried to my parents again, insisting she was the victim. They pleaded with me to keep the peace, but I told them I was done coddling her. She had drawn first blood when she attacked me during pregnancy. No more mercy. Eventually, her fiancé contacted me once again. He shared that he'd seen enough to doubt whether he wanted to marry her at all. He felt deceived by her lies about my family and me. Apparently, she'd painted herself as a supportive sister who'd been cast aside for no reason. When he learned the truth, he couldn't reconcile that with the person he was about to commit to. I didn't push him one way or the other, but I didn't lie either. I told him everything. My sister found out we were talking and accused me of trying to steal her fiancé. The accusation was so absurd, I just laughed. She'd burned every bridge possible. This was all on her. Completely. The wedding fell apart a month later. Her fiancé broke off the engagement, citing irreconcilable differences. My sister went nuclear, telling everyone I'd destroyed her future. Some relatives were shocked, but many had seen the receipts. They knew how vicious she'd been. Even my parents, who tried to remain neutral, started to realize she had crossed every line imaginable. My sister tried to contact me, leaving voicemails that swung between crying and raging. I blocked her number and continued raising Mia in peace. I still had no regret. She'd built her social media persona on stolen pictures of my baby, humiliating me when it suited her. Now she had nothing. Her meltdown was spectacular and well-deserved. I felt oddly vindicated. People have asked if I feel sorry for her. Honestly, no. She never once showed me any compassion, even when I was at my most vulnerable. She humiliated me at a party that was supposed to celebrate my child. She mocked me, spread lies, and then tried to co-opt my baby's image for her own gain. If she'd approached me with genuine remorse, I might have considered a conversation. But she never did that. Everything was always about her, so I don't forgive her. In fact, I'm glad she faced the consequences of her cruelty. Sometimes it's the only way people learn, and if she never learns, that's her problem, not mine. I'm done bending over backward, no more pity. In the aftermath, my life has improved. I focus on Mia, my boyfriend, and my job. We're doing well. Mia is growing into a bright, happy toddler. She has no idea about the drama that surrounded her arrival. As far as I'm concerned, that's how it should stay. My parents, though sad about the family rift, have come to understand my side. They wish my sister would apologize properly, but she remains stubborn. She apparently told some relatives that she'll never forgive me for wrecking her engagement. But I didn't sabotage anything. I just refused to let her lie about me and use my daughter as a trophy. She's suffering from the truth, and that's on her. She earned it. I've received messages from distant cousins who saw the online fallout. They're asking if the stories about my sister's cruelty are true. I confirm they are. Some express shock. Others say they always suspected she was self-centered. My sister tried to do damage control by claiming mental health issues, but I'm not buying it. She targeted me for years out of spite and jealousy, not because of any untreated condition. Everyone struggles, but not everyone lashes out with calculated malice. I don't blame people who want to sympathize with her, but I won't pretend she's some helpless victim. She's responsible for her own actions, and I've washed my hands of it. My baby and I are better off, undeniably free. My sister's attempts at contacting me haven't stopped entirely. She still tries to send messages through relatives or uses unknown numbers. I ignore them. I blocked her on every platform, and I'm not interested in her excuses. Some might wonder if I'll ever let Mia see her. Not in the foreseeable future. I've made it clear that until my sister demonstrates genuine remorse and respect, she's out of our lives. Forgiveness isn't happening. Even if she changes someday, I'll be cautious. She's proven she can't be trusted. I don't hate her. I just don't have space in my life for people who cause harm and refuse to apologize. That's my final stance. She can live with it. So be it. I've taken measures to protect Mia's privacy. I share fewer pictures online, and when I do, they're visible only to a small group of trusted friends. My boyfriend supports this wholeheartedly. He was the one who had to hold me after the baby shower fiasco, witnessing how devastated I was. He has no patience for my sister's antics. We have a wonderful circle of people who love Mia for who she is, not as a social media prop. That difference is huge. My sister thought a baby was a cute accessory, a means to an end. That's not something I can forgive. My child is a person, not a stepping stone for her fake internet popularity. I refuse to budge. Some might argue that revenge is never healthy, but I wasn't going to swallow her abuse quietly. She needed to be exposed for what she did. Her downfall wasn't a result of me manufacturing lies, it was the truth coming to light. She forced my hand when she publicly used my baby's photos and tried to rewrite our history. Now she's experiencing the backlash. I sleep well knowing I didn't stoop to outright fabrications. Everything I posted, everything I showed, was real. If she regrets it, she has only herself to blame. At the end of the day, I protected my daughter, cleared my name, and refused to let her walk all over me. That's real justice. I feel free. I know some readers might think I should have handled it privately. Trust me, I tried. Blocking her, asking politely, ignoring her outbursts. None of it worked. She crossed the line by publicly posting pictures of my child, insulting me, and refusing to remove them. At that point, I had no choice. If you keep letting a bully step on you, they'll never stop. I'm not saying everyone should orchestrate a public takedown, but my situation left me with limited options. Her fiancé deserved to know the truth, and so did everyone else who believed her lies. The moment she tried to manipulate my baby's identity was the moment I decided enough was enough. No regrets, no second chances given. Sometimes I wonder if she'll ever truly learn her lesson. Maybe one day she'll figure out that genuine kindness and respect would have carried her farther than lies and cruelty. But that's not my responsibility. My priority is my daughter's well-being and my own peace. She can keep raging and blaming me for her self-inflicted woes. I'll continue living, loving, and raising Mia in a positive environment. If my sister had approached me with humility at any point, perhaps the outcome would be different. But she never did, so the door remains closed. I moved on, and I'm happier for it. She's the one left with nothing but regret and a shattered reputation. That's the price she paid, rightfully so. So that's my story. My sister mocked my pregnancy, wrecked my baby shower, then pretended to be the perfect aunt online. I exposed her lies, refused to back down, and watched as her wedding plans collapsed. I do not forgive her, and I do not regret my actions. In a perfect world, none of this would have happened. But we live in reality, where actions have consequences. She can't undo what she did, and I won't pretend it never happened. As far as I'm concerned, she's reaping what she sowed. I'm focused on Mia and the people who genuinely care about us. My sister can keep playing victim elsewhere. I'm staying strong and protecting my family no matter what. Thank you.